will call on those who have raised their hands in the order that they were raised. All questions should be directed to the chair. All right, confirming membership, member access. Members, when I call your name, please respond in affirmative. Melissa Murphy.
Here.
Christy Ferrantella.
Here.
I don't see Dawn or Matt yet, but we do have a quorum. So if they come in, I'll reach out to them. Staff, when I call your name, so Libby Gibson.
Present.
Brian Turbeck.
In attendance.
There it is. Erica Mooney.
Here.
Amy Baxter.
Here.
Roberto Santa Maria.
Present.
Greg Tibnan.
Present.
Rick Sears.
Here.
Ken Bogrant.
Here.
And Chuck Larson.
Here.
Now I see Don Hill Holgate.
Present.
Here, thank you. And Maffey.
Here.
Okay. Is there any other anticipated speakers that I'm not seeing? I don't think so in the Hollywood Squares box. Okay. Introduction to remote meetings. This open meeting of the select board is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Please note this meeting is being recorded. All attendees are participating by video conference. We are now, I think we're good there. Okay. So we've called the order. The no changes to the agenda. So we go over to announcements, Libby.
Thank you. So we've got some on there that are just our routine announcements. This meeting is being video and audio recorded. The vaccine clinics are as shown on the agenda sheet there, and additional information can be found on the town website. The F Street Pier repair project will start Monday, October 4th. The pier itself will be closed for the duration of the repairs. The Jackson Point boat ramp is the alternate for that area. We are having a stakeholder meeting this Friday, September 24th at noon on Zoom, as the link is shown there. If anybody's interested in the proposed harbor regulation amendments, which are coming up again at the board meeting on the the 6th, October 6th. And I think that's it. I don't think I had any additional announcements tonight that came in. Erica, if you know of any, let me know, but I think that was it.
Nope, I don't have anything.
Thank you, Libby. So select board announcements or comments, anything from the beginning you might like to announce? I have just one thing. Go ahead, Don.
I was just going to mention that I attended, along with the town manager and Sheila Lucy, the harbor master, the unveiling of the USS Nantucket's crest on Monday, and it was at the Whaling Museum. And then they had another ceremony at the Great Harbor Yacht Club after, and it was just a really special event, and it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to 2023. It sounds like they'll be heading east here, and we'll be able to go to the full commissioning either in Boston, or they may try to anchor off Nantucket somewhere.
Thank you, Don. I came across an email that Libby had forwarded me, just because we're trying to stay up on, Christy and I in our agenda meetings on what's happening at DPW, and Libby's meeting with them once a week. But I just wanted to remind the public of course, we know they're understaffed and a little behind, but here's all the thing that's on the list in the fall and winter and spring. A lot of it is island wide, and it just struck me as a lot, and it reminded me of everything that this department does. Fixing and installing split rail fences island wide where needed, tree hazards along Nantucket Road, Milestone Road, tree pruning downtown and island-wide storm drain and pipe cleaning, island-wide brush cutting, island-wide ditch maintenance, dirt road maintenance, and the list goes on. But island-wide is a lot, and they're getting to it. And I know that crew's working hard, but I just wanted to give a acknowledgement to that department. I know they're understaffed, and I see them out there doing that work. And also let them know the public that it is, if you are next to a drain that needs to be cleaned, it is the most important thing to you, right? And if you are next to a tree hazard, it is the most important thing. And we're trying to get to it all. So thank you, Libby, for forwarding that email. Any other comments, Matt?
I've got one. I had a chance to go to the Vision Nantucket Reliance Challenge exhibition. It's at Macy Warehouse. I hadn't had a chance to do it all year, but I finally went in, and it's a great presentation. I'm really glad I did. I highly suggest people who haven't taken a look at it, take a look at it. Some of it is what you'd expect. It's, sort of architecture students and young people with, putting their ideas on paper, and some of it's a little far-fetched, but but a lot of it is really good. Like, these guys know what they're doing. And some of it would give the HCC a heart attack, some of the building forms, et cetera. But I think what it sort of showed me was that there were going to be some options that we are probably going to be considering that we might not otherwise consider. That there was some pretty interesting ideas where it's not just retreat. People would be living with it on Brant Point with walkways and water in some islands off of Brant Point, sort of to break the water that's coming. And there were some really sort of innovative thoughts on how we're going to handle this. But it's pretty amazing because we're creating great, what they were suggesting were great places to live for the neighbors, for the residents, and also great ecosystems for fish and wildlife and everything else. So, I think it was good timing in the midst of everything we're dealing with. It was good timing for me to walk through there and regain my bearings a little bit, but I highly suggest people go in and take a look. It's really well done.
Thank you, Matt. Any other comments? Moving on to the follow-up comments from prior select board meetings. This is something that Mr. Greeter brought in a public comment, and it's been a couple weeks, but we were just kind of doing the work and waiting for Chuck Larson to be able to come in and give an update. Chuck, are you going to lead us through this, or Greg?
Yes, I'll lead you through it. So very quickly, just some information and an update. This is a project recently identified as a carrying capacity project, but those words don't accurately describe the project as it really is. It's a combination of supply chain resilience, carrying capacity, and resource management. This is a project led by the Army Corps of Engineers Northeast Region with the Martha's Vineyard Commission and town of Nantucket. It also includes Gosnold and the Elizabeth Islands, but the main focus is on Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. While this project has been getting recent coverage in the media, it is a project with roots that date back to early 2020. In January 2020, I met someone from the Northeast region of the Army Corps and saw a presentation that was made on supply chain resilience and planning. I struck up a conversation and asked for input on the development of a MVP action grant project for submission by Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, which was submitted in May of 2020. The action grant was not selected. We missed, we were very close. We missed the cut by about 5 projects. 18 projects were chosen from more than 140 that the state received. It's a very competitive grant program, very limited funding, but it represented a significant need. Through the rest of 2020 and 2021, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and the Army Corps kept the idea alive, looking for other possible funding opportunities. We also refined the scope as we learned more over time. Fast forward to spring 2021, and Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket project teams learned that the Army Corps of Engineers was doing interesting work with the Wampanoag tribe, looking at the impacts of COVID-19 to the food supply and food security for the tribe. Long story short, in June, the Army Corps proposed funding the Martha's Vineyard Nantucket project with a grant through the Planning Assistance to States program. And so over the last few months, the Army Corps, Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket have jointly developed a statement of work that's currently being refined and will be completed by the end of September. In essence, this is a project of regional nature looking at Massachusetts coastal island communities with an eye towards supply chain resilience and community carrying capacity. It also includes other topics such as natural resources, quality of life, energy, waste management, water supply, food supply, sea level rise, climate change impacts. This is not an exhaustive list, but I think there'll even be something in there about PFAS as well. In summary, I would like to describe the key deliverables as, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket working together and addressing critical needs for each island, public outreach sessions for community input and review, data collection and developing a methodology to assess critical needs such as the supply chain, resource management, and carrying capacity, along with suggested metrics to measure performance, and tools, data, recommendations, and reports specific to each island. And probably one more nugget to add, as a federal study, this work will be an asset to Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, seeking other sources of federal and state funds for future projects. More information will be forthcoming, and that would include a presentation by the Army Corps of Engineers project team. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments from the board? Great. Thank you, Chuck.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Appreciate the
Thank you,
clarification.
Mr. Chair. Yep.
Okay, we're moving on to public comment. Any comments from the public? Addresses a issue that is not currently on this agenda. Please raise your digital hand. Okay, seeing no hands being raised, we'll move on to COVID-19 update, Public Health Departments.
Good afternoon. Very similar report to last week. We're in really good, surprisingly good shape, knock on wood, doing pretty well. Our current testing, our 7-day positivity average is 3.79%, which is really good. And the most recent BioBot report has shown us that we're only expecting about 1 case a day. So far, we've been hovering a little bit around there. So that's pretty good. We are expected to move towards 1 day a week clinics starting in October. And we'll be announcing that short as soon as that decision is fully made. The good news is we're currently doing 3rd doses for immunocompromised individuals. And so if you feel like you meet that criteria, please give us a call, send us an email at health@nantucket-ma.gov. Please do not just show up to the clinics, as you may be exposed to somebody who may have it. And then lastly, we are expecting the youth doses to be approved within the next month or so. The FDA keeps saying that they're expecting ages 5 to 11 to be approved soon. So we're just waiting on that to be able to get the youth. Once we are able to roll out youth doses and we are able to get a bulk of the youth vaccinated, you'll be seeing us most likely lifting mask mandates, going back to relative normality. The state may still have their mandates on, so students in school will still need to be wearing their masks, and you'll still see the state mandates on vaccination. But what you'll see is a lot of the local enforcement and local orders slowing down. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Roberto. Any questions or comments? Christy?
Thank you. Just a few questions. If it is approved for children aged 5 to 11, will the town be doing those vaccinations, or will the hospital be back involved, or what is kind of the process for those?
We currently, we're still working on that, to be honest, because one of the issues that we're going to see is that with it being for children, it's better. A drive-through method isn't really that conducive for that age group. So we would want to see more of a inside, more of a clinical setting, if you want to call it that. So we're working with the hospital to look at what the options are for that. So it'll probably be a hybrid of what we saw before.
Thank you. And just a second question. I know that some towns like P-Town has moved their mask mandate to an advisory. I know the Board of Health is keeping ours in place. Are there any other towns currently with a mask mandate, or are we the only Massachusetts town?
Oh, there's a lot, actually. Over half of the state of Massachusetts is under a mask mandate right now. I can find the list again. It was recently published on WBUR. I'll get that over to you as soon as I find it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Anything else for Roberto? Okay. Thank you, Roberto. Appreciate it.
One quick one.
One more thing.
Found it.
Oh,
Let me quickly share the screen here. What you're seeing here is in the state of Massachusetts, where mask mandates are on all indoor spaces. On the right column is where you'll see them on all indoor. On the left column is just municipal offices. And everything in purple still has a mask mandate in place. So it's still pretty significant. Even though Provincetown, so far, as you see, Provincetown is the only community that has actually rescinded their mask mandate. Some, the ones that are in gray, never actually put one in. But yeah, it's the great majority.
thank you.
Thank you.
No new business that I know of, Libby. We'll move over to approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts. Is there a motion to approve the minutes, payroll warrants, and treasury warrants? All in one swoop?
I'll make that motion.
Yeah, I'll make the motion, but I made an adjustment to the minutes on September, what was it, 15th? And
Erica did send us that.
yes, you guys have all seen that. So as long as that's okay, and then we can move forward.
I'll second with Matt's edits.
All those in favor by roll call: Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Don Holgate,
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. That passes. Pending contracts. Is there anything you wanted to review with us, Libby? No? Any questions from the board? There's no questions or a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you, Don. Roll call: Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Don Holgate,
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. Thank you. Moving on to the Citizen Department request for approval of application for change of manager, annual all alcohol beverage general on-premise license for Nantucket Historical Association, DBA Whaling Museum, from James Russell, manager, to Joanna Richard. Amy, you got to walk us through that?
Yes, thank you. Very easy one. Is administrative request for a change of manager as is required when there is a change in management. Obviously, James Russell has left the museum, and Joanna has been acting as manager. Obviously, with COVID and everything, we waited till we got through it to put through the paperwork. But this will officially appoint her as the licensing manager and in charge of all things with the license, and fully approved on our end, has gone through all the requirements and just needs approval here, and we'll be sending up to the state.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions or a motion? Matt?
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you, Don. All those in favor by roll call: Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Don Holgate,
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. That passes 5-0. Thank you, Amy. Town managers report, over to you, Libby.
Thank you. Chuck Larson is going to take us through a brief update of our island-wide PFAS assessment. Chuck?
Yes, thank you, Libby. So in your packet, there's a colorful table, 3 pages long, that really serves as our status report for the different projects we have going on with PFAS. This is the short form of the report, just to let you know, but we have this kind of information to help us with planning and tracking what we're doing, and it's discussed weekly in the project meetings with Greg and Roberto and others. So what I show is a project broken into major projects and then specifically next actions that we're doing or hoping to do for each major task. I don't think I have time to go through each of these, but why don't I just go through a couple of highlights. Regarding the UMass Mass DEP private well testing, we are starting to get information back in. The results are being sent to Roberto. Any tests that come back with a reading of PFAS are given an opportunity to sample again to verify. And one of the things that might be helpful to know with all this is that the measurements represent the concentration at the point where the sample was taken. If the sample is taken down the plumbing in the home, further away from where it enters the building, it's possible that the plumbing system has PFAS using Teflon tape or pipe dope. So I don't believe that information is being collected by Mass DEP, but I think it's something that we definitely want to try to get information about, knowing that, hey, if you grab the sample as it enters the building at a tap, that would be more indicative of the PFAS in the well, not necessarily the PFAS in the well and the home plumbing system. So we'll be hearing more about that. Lots on community outreach. We did have that public listening session and working on the responses to the 56 questions and answers. Some of them are being reviewed by council, and Roberto and I will do the finishing touches before the first batch is posted. We do have a public listening session number 2 on October 21st, 5 to 7 p.m. More details will follow. Regarding the work with CDM Smith, we had a very, very informative meeting with Mass DEP, Town of Nantucket, Waste Options, and our respective consultants. And the objective was to follow up on previous discussions with respect to the assessment of the landfill due to PFAS detections in the co-compost. We discussed the details of the on-site groundwater, surface water sampling, and a work plan with flow chart and steps that's being refined. And we touched base on where we stand with the assessment approval of use of reclaimed soils for use in the landfill cap. So a very good meeting. So some of the key takeaways, very briefly, the assessment sampling plan will be submitted as a SW22 minor modification to the landfill permit. The document and sampling plan will be submitted for Mass DEP approval in 4 to 6 weeks. Mass Solid Waste DEP is meeting with their Office of Research and Standards to provide us the latest information and guidance for sampling and testing. And as Mass DEP suggested, every week there seems that there's something new. So we want to make sure that we're using the latest methods and testing protocols. And then third, CDM, town administration, and George Aronson are to decide, how to include reclaimed soils in part of this work, whether it's a separate SW22 or part of this. And that's going to be based on getting more information. CDM Smith was on site last week. We toured the locations that have previously stored or stored AFFF, the firefighting foam. We were able to meet with, the fire chief and, attended all the locations on the island with a lot of information. That will be used to help develop a recommended standard operating procedure for the town in handling and tracking usage of the AFFF. The rest of the items on the list are somewhat self-explanatory, but all this does really add up to a lot of time. And I think that, putting this together was a helpful exercise, for me to better understand all the pieces to this thing. And it does seem that this list gets longer over time. I hope that answers some of your questions, but I'll be happy to answer anything else.
Thank you, Chuck. Really quick, you handle all our strategic projects. How much of your time in 2021 has been put towards PFAS? Is that half?
Oh, it's probably 80 or 90%.
Yeah.
It's really that much. And then Roberto's been getting involved, and then of course Greg too. And so the three of us, kind of pound away at this. But yeah, it's been a huge part of my work effort.
Have you felt like it's putting pieces of a puzzle together? It's on the newer side and it's starting to come together in a sense, because there's so many different parts to it, right? Mass DEP and
yeah, what's enjoyable about it is really the discovery part of this, and then kind of working on the cutting edge that, hey, we're going to be developing test methods that have never existed, and we're working with Mass DEP to really set some of these practices for others to follow. And that part of the work I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any comments from board, staff, anything else? Well, thank you all for the work you're doing on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks very much, Chuck. And I would just echo what Chuck said. Chuck has been invaluable with this whole process, and we honestly don't know what we would do without his involvement. And that having been said, we need help. And we're working internally on some, hopefully some recommendations to the board that we're going to be making on this, because we are finding that this is such an all-encompassing effort that we don't have near the resources to properly deal with it. And it is an emerging issue in many, many towns. And I think Chuck could speak to this if needed, but I think we're finding that we are spending way more time on it than any of our counterparts. Some of them don't even know what PFAS is when we are talking about it at meetings. So we're really ahead of the game here, even though I think people are very concerned and very worried, and we're trying to do our best to get solutions and answers and protocols in place. And it's going to be costly and expensive going forward. And it is a material that is in many of the things we use every single day. Next is review of the preliminary fiscal 2023 general fund budget projections. This is the time of year when the finance director and I give you all our preliminary presentation. We've met with the finance committee on this, and we had a meeting the other day with the ad hoc budget work group, which is comprised of the chair and vice chairs of the select board, finance committee, and school committee, myself, the finance director, and school superintendent. And remember, these are preliminary projections. They're always a bit conservative at the beginning while we're waiting for additional information as more and more comes in with the development of the current fiscal year's information, fiscal 22. We're currently planning obviously for fiscal 23. And we have a lot of things that we're watching, monitoring that, may or may not come forward, but we also have a lot of issues that we're trying to get at that are largely contained within the board's strategic plan. So Brian, I think you're going to take us through, and I will chime in as needed.
Yes, thank you, Libby. Erica, could you go to the next page, please? So thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to present this. I think it's an important starting point to kind of set the expectations as we move forward. The first slide is just, as we do every year, is really just a reminder of what Proposition 2.5 is, what the levy is, and how we calculate it. So I don't think I'll take everybody through this slide because I'm pretty sure everybody will remember as we go through. Erica, the next slide, please. Thank you. So how do we increase the levy every year? Every year we are allowed to raise an additional 2.5% in real and personal property tax revenue from the prior year. New growth is added and any permanent overrides that we may have voted in, as well as temporary exclusions, which can temporarily raise the levy limit for the town, being either debt exclusions or capital exclusions, which we certainly have taken advantage of over the years in helping further the town's goals in infrastructure and capital. Next slide, please. So the starting point for all of the budget really is, what do we believe the levy limit will be? And I just want to remind everybody that this is very preliminary for fiscal 23, because we have not even set the tax rate for fiscal 22 yet, which will ultimately be the starting point for the levy limit for fiscal 23. So this is very preliminary. The starting point for fiscal 22 is 81,091,000. Increasing that by 2.5 will raise an additional $2,027,000 in fiscal 22. We're projecting new growth at 700,000. It most likely will come in higher, but that's where the assessor feels comfortable as we go through the new growth calculations and the submission to the state. And then we also factor into the projection for fiscal 22, the $5 million override that was passed at the annual town meeting and subsequent annual town election last year. Our starting point for fiscal 23 becomes the $88,818,000 for the allowable levy limit. Projecting 2.5% increase would generate an additional $2,220,000 in revenue, along with conservatively the same $700,000 that the assessor has that we're conservatively projecting right now. Gives us a allowable levy limit before debt exclusions of $91,739,000. We currently have $8.8 million in debt exclusions, which would give us a maximum allowable levy limit of $100,563,000. Next slide, please, Erica. Thank you. On the left-hand column here is where we are currently believing that the revenue projection for fiscal 22 will end up, as with some minor changes, especially in rooms or in meals tax, where we think it'll end up during the tax rate recap setting process. During the initial projection for fiscal 22 last year at this time, some of these numbers were substantially lower. Most specifically, rooms tax was substantially lower than where we ultimately moved it to, and where it's shown now for the fiscal 22 portion. Moving to fiscal 23, we believe we'll be able to raise $14,472,300 in local estimated receipts. We have, as you can see, brought meals tax up substantially. We are also bringing up licenses and permits, which is generally consisting of the largest components are the plumbing and wiring inspections and permits, as well as building permits and HTC filing fees. Next slide, please. So factoring in all revenue sources being real and personal property tax, the $100,563,000, we are projecting the same $400,000 for abatements exemptions. We will continue to monitor that as we go through the current process to set the fiscal 22 tax rate. The $14,522,000 for local receipts. And we're conservatively projecting local state aid at the $3,880,000, which is what the cherry sheet shows for fiscal 22. And we're projecting that only because we're in September discussing this, and the legislature hasn't even set their revenue projections for fiscal 23 yet, and they don't typically do that until December of this coming year. So while we do expect that there may be some changes to that, we are conservatively managing it by continuing to expect that we'll get a minimum of the $3.8 million. So all told, we project $118,566,000 in revenue for the fiscal 23 operations. Next slide, please, Erica. Thank you. This slide shows you the fiscal from fiscal 17 to fiscal 21, a 5-year average of the historical trend in the revenues and the growth rate from 17 to 21. Next slide, please, Erica. Thank you. So here we start with what we think the preliminary, very preliminary budget projections for fiscal 23 will be. And we've, on the left-hand side of this, have included what the approved budget from town meeting was. For salaries for school and town, these projections include only estimated rollover numbers as a starting point. The town most likely will see a little bit larger increase in the rollover than what's there as we continue to work through the staffing and review of that. The school's number is also a very preliminary number as they continue to work through where their staffing is going to be. We have not projected an increase for the transfer to the community school. Operating expenses for the town, you'll notice that it's down to $7,774,000. That eliminates all one-time expenses that were in the approved budget from free cash. We've also removed the one-time item from free cash for the school as the starting basis for the budgetary projections. Medical insurance, as I've explained not only to the FinCom, but to the ad hoc budget committee yesterday, we're budgeting around a 12% increase based on the advice of our health insurance consultant. And the only reason that we're starting at a higher number like that is that typically the first 2 or 3 months of every new fiscal year are primarily made up of run out claims from the prior fiscal year. So we really don't see a lot of activity in terms of the claim history for our insurance until around October, when we can start to build a reliable analysis. So that's why we've started at a little bit higher number, and typically we'll work to release that number downward as we get better information and can build better trending and forecasting for where we think it'll end up. The other number that we have taken up a little bit, we've taken unemployment insurance up only because our rate has ticked up a little bit, primarily due to the way unemployment insurance rates are trending because of COVID. And then general insurance, we have taken up approximately 15% based on the advice of our insurance consultant. Primarily, this is around surrounding our property insurance. Not that we've had any large claims, but due to the many different natural disasters that have occurred across the country, insurance companies continue to take some pretty large hits in terms of claims. And we certainly, being an island, do have some risk that they factor in every year. And so we've tried to build in for that. I will note to the board, as I've noted to both Finance Committee and Ad hoc Committee, Budget Committee, we are going to be putting our entire property liability and all of our insurances out to bid. So we do expect and hope that that number will come in lower as we progress through this. Retirement is based on the funding schedule, so at approximately 8.5% increase. Debt service, principal, and interest is a function of the waterfall schedule for all the debt that is on the books for the general fund, both inside the levy limit and debt excluded. Preliminarily, very preliminary, $99,461,000 in expenses for the general fund operating budget. Next slide, please, Erica. This slide projects all the special articles and any other fund transfers. We're projecting a small increase now based on last year for the county assessment of approximately 2.5%. We, for initial budget projections, have kept health and human services at $650,000. We have put in a line for the special purpose stabilization fund. We've put in the approved budget from last year of $95,000. We expect as we progress through this and have more collections come into the local option marijuana tax, which is then allocated to the special purpose stabilization fund, that as we move toward closer to town meeting, we will actually identify that number for allocation. So we do expect that we'll be making an allocation at the annual town meeting for that. We're recommending the same $500,000 for the reserve fund and other post-employment benefits. We currently are also recommending the same $1,625,000 that was allocated at the town meeting in Article 10 for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which would keep the funding at the $2 million level that we committed to that the town funded in fiscal 22. Town and school minimum capital funding requirement this year comes out at $1,070,000. We have the 3 transfers to the not only to Island Home and to the solid waste. For both transfers, we've projected those to increase by 2.5%. And we're keeping the statutory expenditures at the same level from the cherry sheet of $1,012,000. Preliminarily, and again, I remind everybody, we're very early in the process, $116,790,000 in expenses, which would leave us capacity to allocate to the school and to the town additional spending of $1,776,000. As we sit here today, and I tell you that that's what we look like we will have for excess levy capacity, I can tell you that there's certainly a lot of demands already in terms of staffing and other programmatic changes that people are already discussing and most likely will be advancing. So this number is going to change dramatically over the next 3 or 4 months as we go through this process. Erica, if the next slide, please. Thank you. Again, we do the same thing with expenses that we do with revenue. We show you from 2017 to 2021, which these have all been in all of the quarterly reports that we present to the select board on a quarterly basis. Next slide, please. This slide, I think, is relatively very important in terms of the overall presentation and discussion, because it really identifies the areas that we're still working on through this process and in the early stages. Citizen warrant articles, obviously they haven't been submitted. We typically don't include any budgetary allocations for them, but we certainly don't know what those will look like yet. So it's still to be determined for us. What free cash will be certified at is still an open agenda item. We will be submitting most likely by the end of next week to the state and hoping that it'll be certified by the week of October 9th. Local estimated receipts. This is primarily around rooms and meals tax. For the first quarter of fiscal 22 will really be a good barometer of the numbers that we've put in there and how comfortable we might be with where they are at, or whether there may be an opportunity to raise them from where we've projected them for fiscal 23. We've included solid waste on this outstanding to be determined list because I think the solid waste enterprise operations in and of themselves really, and I've had this discussion with the town manager, really are lending itself, especially as we get closer to the end of this contract and how we move forward into the future, really are lending itself to the need to have a full-time solid waste manager dedicated to overseeing that. I think it's become a much larger operation than just having it directly within the purview of the DPW director themselves. And at last year's town meeting, we did allocate funding for 2 take it or leave it positions, but I think that it's becoming apparent that to manage that effectively and efficiently in a way that benefits the community as a whole, that it may take more personnel than the original allocation. So we've left that here as a to be determined, because any allocations there are certainly going to require us to have the funding in the general fund to be able to transfer as part of that subsidy into the solid waste enterprise fund. Union negotiations, there are still a couple unions that we're still in negotiations with, so there's still an open item on what the impacts without any agreed upon contracts will ultimately be as we progress through this. Health insurance, as I did note, where we're at and where we're starting from and the rationale behind that. Retirement assessment we do put on here because although we have a funding schedule, we always are aware that PARAC could make changes to that depending on how the pension system performed in the prior year. So while we think that it is in a very good place based on our discussions, it is an open item as we move through this. Local aid is here only because, again, the legislature hasn't even begun their discussions on the revenue side or the allocation. So it is, as we move through it, we need to be cognizant of that. NRTA is simply on here because I don't know if there'll be any service changes or increases or any changes to the way the service is delivered, which could potentially impact the cherry sheet and our allocation. We just had a wonderful presentation from Chuck about PFAS, so there's certainly a to be determined about the impact and the cost of that project across the island. And Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund and Wastewater Infrastructure Improvement Fund are here because prior to COVID, we had begun the analysis of whether we wanted to potentially join the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund and raise the rooms occupancy tax by the 2.75% that would be allocated to that fund, or whether we wanted to create a wastewater infrastructure improvement fund that would operate very similar to the Community Preservation Act, but it would be dedicated to wastewater and infrastructure improvements. So we were undertaking the analysis prior to COVID, but it did get pushed to the back burner on whether it would be more advantageous to keep all of the money here versus sending it to the fund and then submitting projects to be allocated to the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. So that still is an outstanding item that we are working towards being able to provide the town manager with the analysis to make a recommendation ultimately to the select board.
Brian, thank you. The only other thing I would add to this, and this is kind of, a working document, is there may be some items that we're going to be adding or working on to include in the budget relating to the board's strategic plan. And one of those things that we are actively working on relates to a sustainability function for the town. And I think we're ready to take any questions that the board might have.
Questions or comments from the board? Matt?
Yeah, one
one
question. Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, question was, the insurance, medical insurance is quite an increase. How much of that is COVID related? We're self-insured. Have we had any issues with that, or is that hit us or no?
We don't get the actual breakdown of what, at least I don't get it individually, Matt, the breakdown of the claims. I most likely, some of it very well may be related to that. The 12% increase is just an estimate of what the claims will look like in the future. Some of that's related to reinsurance and stop loss insurance because we are self-insured, and obviously some of those claims can become very expensive, and stop loss insurance is going up tremendously. So a great percentage of that 12% is most likely baked into the anticipated, increase specifically related to stop loss and not necessarily related to any particular subset or individual claim.
Will you explain stop loss to us?
Yeah, sure. So because we're self-insured, it means that we pay our health insurance subscriber provider, which is Blue Cross Blue Shield, pays the claims, and then we pay dollar for dollar for those claims. Stop loss insurance is created and utilized to prevent the town from having a catastrophic loss that's unanticipated. So stop loss insurance assumes the responsibility for the insurance payments above a particular level. In our case, our stop loss insurance is at $200,000. So for every insurance claim that we have, we're responsible for the first $200,000 of any claim. And then above that, our stop loss insurance steps in and covers all of the costs for the claim on behalf of the town. So does that answer your question, Matt? Okay.
I assumed that what it was, but I wanted people to on camera to understand.
Okay.
I had one question, Brian. What did you say the operating expenses were down? You said that was connected to free cash, just taking some of those expenses out?
Yes. So if you recall, every year in the operating expenses, non-salary for both the school and the town, we include one-time items that are funded by free cash. Okay. So when we begin the projections for fiscal 23, we remove those one-time items that would not be moving forward on an annual basis that were funded solely by free cash to get the starting point for the operating expenses. So as an example, in last year, the entire operating expenses were a little over $8.8 million. A little over $1 million of that was specifically funded by free cash and was for one-time expenses. So starting point moving forward is $7.7 million. And that's the number that we project in the beginning basis in this preliminary discussion and presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thanks very much, Brian. Great job. Our Assistant Finance Director, Rick Sears, is going to take us through the fiscal 23 preliminary capital project request. And again, this is right around the time of year that we typically do this. I think you all have seen some of this before, sort of recently. I feel like we had a sort of a recent review of this. And again, these are preliminary. The Capital Program Committee is working its way through review of the departmental project requests. And we are also still kind of hashing through them ourselves. But moving on. Rick?
Great. Good evening. Yes, this is all very preliminary, and there is lots of information in here. So I am going to just try to flag the new or the large projects. And I'm going to do that starting with FY23 first as a group across all of the general fund and then enterprise fund. And then I'll move on to the out years. So fiscal years 24 through 33. Eric, I think you can next slide, please. So what we've been doing so far, as Libby just flagged up briefly, we had an early meeting with the chairs of the Select Board, Finance Committee, and the Capital Committee. Got some good questions and some good guidance from that, and I think sort of the early and often on capital seems to be effective. We are working through the project reviews and the prioritization, and I think we're in a pretty good place from a town manager perspective. Saying that, there are still plenty of refinements that come into these capital requests. Updated quotes, better timelines, better information. Capital Committee, I think, is about 2/3 of the way done through their reviews of the departments. That doesn't mean 2/3 of the way done through their entire process. They still have to debate, deliberate, do their rankings, write their report, and they'll meet they've met every week since August the 12th, and will continue to meet pretty much every week until the end of the year. And then just a reminder that you all have access to the capital request software. So if you have any access problems, please let me know. And it is a pretty good source for information on the discrete project. So I recommend that. Eric, if you change the slide. So going through, I'm going to flag not all of these projects because there's way too many, and we'll be here all night if that were the case. So FY23. So for Marine, just want to flag the renovate and reconstruct the Harbor Master Building. I think you're familiar with that here. That request is for $2 million. I think you're aware that we had 3.45 appropriated. We have 3.1 left. We got the bids in. The bids range from 4.9 to 6. And so we have this $2 million funding gap, hence the request. The next one down, I'd like to talk about Loran Seasonal Housing Repairs Phase 2. Phase 1 was the exteriors of the buildings. Phase 2 is interior. It's $2.5 million. That's quite a preliminary number. There is hazardous material there that needs to be remediated, and that's why the number is as high as it is. Down towards the bottom, under school, the campus-wide improvements, $16.4 million. The total cost is 17.5, but there's $1.1 million already authorized. This is for the full plan, which is the tennis and the baseball, the 2 synthetic fields, the track, the grandstands, and all the attendant infrastructure. Eric, if you change the slide, please. So IT is generally routine items. I will mention one, which is the last one there, which is replace the wireless network. That's the follow-on from the $65,000 that you approved last year. This is the actual work. Last year was the study and the design of the work. Otherwise, everything else in IT is an annual or biannual regular ask. Town administration, several projects to talk about here. 2 fairgrounds municipal office design. I know you've heard about this one. This is the design and project management request. So it's $6 million. There is a further request in FY25 for $50 million, which I'll show you later, which is the actual construction. There's a request here, which is a newer one. Sorry, not a newer one. But the senior center feasibility study is in there for $500,000. There is further funding requests in the out years for another roughly $30 million for that senior center. The next one down, seasonal employee housing, design, project management, and construction. So this is the whole thing, $8.5 million. This is for one, maybe two buildings for seasonal housing out at 4 fairgrounds. Probably will house a minimum of 30 to 35 people, possibly more than that. The next one for $2 million, PFAS groundwater soil investigation. You just heard from Chuck. So this is to continue the sampling and analysis and the dollars necessary for follow-up and remediation. One last one on this page, the senior employee housing feasibility study. So sort of a late entry. I think the town manager wanted this in. Our ability to attract and retain top talent at the department head level is sometimes determined by our ability to provide housing or their ability to find housing. And so the town manager would like to have this feasibility study done for what we could do to build housing for that very senior level in town staff. There's a further $6 million in the out years for that. These are all very preliminary numbers. They're not grounded in quotes or bids or anything like that. So Erica, can you turn the slide please? So fire has a really well-established vehicle replacement schedule. So I'm not going to touch on any of that. The Capcom reviews it every year. There's just 2 projects here to mention, neither one particularly large. The active shooter response, it's ballistic vests and helmets and training and planning and community awareness, 75,000. You haven't seen that one before. And then the firefighting foam disposal and replacement just below that. We have fluorinated compounds in the firefighting foam, and we need to dispose of those and replace it with a different type of foam. It's quite possible there'll be Homeland Security dollars to help fund this. And that's it for fire. Erica, please. The following slide. So hazard mitigation, health and human services, and natural resources. I'm going to talk about just 2 projects here, under hazard mitigation. So the Myacomet Pond dredging design and permitting. So there's a prior study that recommends a combination of dredging and phosphorus inactivation for Myacomet Pond. And this $300,000 is determined if the dredging plan would yield acceptable results. So if it does, there's a $4 million project behind that in the following year, of which probably $1.5 million would be funded by the land bank and possibly up to $1 million by private citizens. But I'll show you that one and when we look at the out years later. And then the one just below that, the groundwater mapping and nutrient flow, is also new to the plan. This is updating a 1990 study that helps ensure water quality across the whole of the harbor and strengthen aquatic ecosystems. And so it's the study that informs the action plan. This one would be spread over a couple of years, and it's possible that the Great Harbor Yacht Club would be funding some portion of that. Erica, please, next slide. Public Works. So this is very preliminary, as you can imagine, with the department head having resigned. There's no vehicles in here yet. There's plenty of additional project information and costs that is still to come. I guess the big one, well, there's a couple of big ones on this slide, but the first one, the Public Works campus-wide improvements. You're all familiar with the decision to either remain or relocate. This $3 million is for design and project management at the 188 Nantucket Road facility. So, sorry, let me just restate that. This is for design and OPM for wherever we go, but the amount here is based on staying at 188. So it's, as I said, it's preliminary amount. There's another $15 million in FY24. So it's a total of $18 million. Down under transportation, just flag road improvements. It's in for $2 million. It's usually $1 million to $1.25 million, but thought we needed to get some additional funds in there for fixing roads. And then down below, Parks and Rec Master Plan Phase 1 of 3. So that's there for $5 million. Phase one is actually $19 million spread over several years. There's multiple contingent steps that are required. And so there's a lot of work I think we need to do around how we, how much money we request in 23 versus 24. It, as I said, it does take several years to complete that. And I think there's also, we maybe want to think of it through a more comprehensive lens of, you know, we've got tennis courts going in at the school, we've got tennis courts going in at Tom Nevers. Where do we need, what do we need and where do we need it? So just, Erica, if you turn the page, this will be the recap slide. So the general fund requests as it stands right now, $59.7 million was 33 at this point. 33 is what 0.1 was what was approved at the town meeting for FY22. And you can see there the sort of the notable projects or the projects contributing to the increase. So carrying on to the FY23 enterprise fund requests. First one, our island home facility design and project management. So this is the first phase, you know, the design and project management phase for the new facility, $6.5 million. You'll see a $60 million out year forecast for the full facility. So we were kind of modeling project management and design at 10 to 12% of construction costs. And so that's that number preliminary, as I said. And then down at the bottom, probably the one worth mentioning, water main replacement. That $2.45 million was originally to replace the water main on Orange Street from Main out to the Orange Union intersection. But I think instead, Mark is thinking that this is much more about going to be used towards providing water to areas out near the airport. That's a, use Mark's words, is a very fluid situation about where they're going to actually do the work. Airport and sewer. Nobody Farm is probably the first one worth noting. This is the design and project management phase for a housing project for airport staff. There's another $5.5 million behind that in an out year. And then also worth noting, so starting where it says permitting for airport layout plan, so about halfway down, permitting, and then computer apron, and then terminal improvements, and then airport rescue, and then the airport master plan. Those are all part of the airport improvement plan. They total $17.2 million, and those are normally reimbursed at about a 95% level. So you're looking at not 17.2, but more like $850,000 for those particular projects. Sewer, quite a few to talk about, or three to talk about here. The very first one, the membrane upgrades, those our membranes are like 10 years old. They have a lifespan of 5 to 7 years. They need to be replaced according to the sewer director. And we have $1.3 million of prior funding. So we need a supplemental funding of about $1 million. The CMOM program, which you hear about every year, the FY23 work will be following on the back of the year 2 CCTV inspections. So this will be about repairs and replacements for the recommendations out of the year 2 CCTV inspections. And then the PFAS, we've talked about PFAS. This is in, there's some emerging technology. This would be a pilot program, which if it's effective, it eliminates PFAS and biosolids and wastewater. If it's effective, we pay. If it's not effective, we don't pay. And there's another $10 million if this were to actually work out in FY25, which I'll show you in a minute. So to recap the enterprise funds, if you could turn the page, Erica, please. $43 million of requests versus 35.9 last year. The delta there being largely the $6.5 million for our island home. So that's it for FY23. We thought it might be useful just to give you a quick view of what might be the debt, look like the debt exclusion projects for FY23. If you could change the slide, Erica, please. So $45.4 million. We've talked about all these projects already, but just wanted to put them on a page for you. So then just sort of changing gears, move on to what we call the out year. So you can switch the slide, Erica, please. FY24 through 33. Erica, if you could change the slide, please. Thank you. So there's 6 slides like this, and I'll just, like the other slides, I'm going to just try and highlight a few items. So first of all, this is the we're trying to get better at doing the 10-year forecasts every year, and I think we've gotten better this year. So in getting better looks like what you see in the school, with a pretty defined path for their normal, regular updating, things like roofs and equipment and building improvements. So you see those all mapped out. We'll just flag on this page. In FY32 under school, you'll see a $50 million. So bottom right-hand corner of your slide, it's a total placeholder. It is driven by population growth, but it is for replacement of the new school, which is a new middle school, which is built back in 1955. It'd be located near Surfside and First Way. The only one flag on that page. If you turn the page, please, Erica. Of note on for fire, as I said earlier, they have all their vehicles in a very discrete, detailed schedule. But the Sconset Fire Station design, which is about halfway down the table, you'll see 7.85 million over 24 and 25. That is based on about an 8,000 square foot fire station in Sconset. And also by adding this, we eliminated another project, which was an engineering shelter in Sconset. So because those items could be housed in the new fire station out there. On the following page, I'll talk about under town administration. There's not much in IT to talk about. It's just sort of the normal allocations for infrastructure and maintenance and replacing town computers. But under town administration, the 2 fairgrounds office I mentioned earlier, you're familiar with it. We have $50 million in FY25. These are all very preliminary numbers, by the way. The new senior center, which I also flagged earlier, there's 3.6 for. So what we talked about earlier was a feasibility study. Now this is 3.6 for the design and OPM and 27 million for the build. And then I also flagged earlier the senior employee housing, and this would be the actual design, OPM, and construction. The 1 and the 5 million in the 2 respective years there. Down below, the 3rd project under hazard mitigation, Pulpus Road to Sketchfoot Pond. That's way out in FY29, $10 million. That's a total preliminary number for actually raising the road entirely. There is some remediation work that will be, there's a request in FY23 for some funds to do the remediation of what we need to do now to put, to fix to remediate the work that we had done a little bit earlier on that, in that area. Myacomet Pond dredging design and permitting, I mentioned to you already. This $4 million is the actual dredging. It's not design and permitting. Again, some of that funded elsewhere from other sources. And then Erica, if you could turn the page, please. Public Works, under the first one, Public Works campus-wide improvement, there's the $15 million that I mentioned before. It's an estimate based on staying at 188. If we relocate, it could potentially be more. And then down at the bottom of the page, Parks and Rec master plan, I left it in there recognizing that we don't have any funding attached to it, but that we do need to continue to bottom that out. And good examples of things that we can fold into it would be the project that's just above it, the Nobodier field improvements, the artificial turf that should roll into Parks and Rec. The Jetties Beach tennis court resurfacing there for $500,000 could be rolled in and thought about maybe in a more comprehensive way. And then on the next slide is sewer, and there's a large number of projects here. So starting with the first one, Baxter Road. So the town manager, as you know, is working toward a comprehensive plan. And so this is a placeholder reflecting what sewer might require. So this would be for easements, for takings, for removing asbestos, for reconstruction of any infrastructure that we need to put there. That's in for $10 million. It's quite a preliminary number. Halfway down, sort of Nantucket, Warren's Landing, Somerset is the actual work. It's probably going to be 35, $45 million. I think we have a more recent, a recently updated program from Weston and Sampson. And then down below, PFAS removal, which I also flagged a little bit earlier, $10 million in FY25. Again, this is a placeholder for that emerging technology. And then the last one is Surfside Wastewater Treatment Upgrade Phase 2, a little over $8 million. This is, you'll recall, I think it was FY18. We were only able to partially fund the wastewater treatment upgrade program. So this is about technology replacement and upgrading polymer systems and airflow, and actually the plan is still being developed in full for what it would take to do this phase 2. Almost done here. Excuse me. So Erica, oh, there you go. So our island home, $60 million in FY24. That's priced out at about $1,000 a square foot. And I'm sure the town manager would tell you it's completely preliminary still at this point in time. And then down below under airport, Nobody Farm housing, that's the balance of that $6.6 million you saw in 23, where it was a little over $1 million for the project management and design. And then the airport takes all their AIP projects and lumps them together. So you see those values of 17.65 and 19.8 in the out years. And so move from there to the next slide, please. And so then just the potential out year debt exclusion. Now, this is also obviously very preliminary, but these are the projects that we might be thinking about as debt exclusion projects in the next year. It'd probably be more helpful if I had given you annual totals, but I will do that for you next time if I come back. So, but $237.8 million. And then the final slide, like Brian's to be determined slide, is the sort of the unknowns, things with potential impact to the capital improvement plan. So the comprehensive plan for Baxter Road, which we've already talked about, the scope of the PFAS remediation, which you've heard plenty about tonight, the public work campus-wide or campus improvements, and the decision to remain or relocate will determine, how much what it may cost to do that. Continue to work on coordination and integration with other island projects with respect to the Parks and Rec plan, and recognize at the same time that there may be some revisions required due to environmental issues out at Tom Nevers. And then finally, the impact of any new project recommendations from the Coastal Resiliency Committee. And we don't know, of course, the number there. So on to the next page, just as next steps, we're going to continue to finish the prioritization, and the capital committee will continue to meet and finish off their departmental reviews, and ultimately we'll start working on funding sources. So that's sort of the first preliminary update on capital. So if there's any questions, great. If not, I'm complete. I'm finished.
Yeah, just a couple comments. First off, some of these, like the Park and Rec, some of the numbers on that and that plan, I look at some of those things and say we need to get our hiring and our ability up to speed with our wishes. I kind of, our eyes are, okay, what is it? Your eyes are bigger than your stomach. I mean, we're trying to eat things and we can't even, deal with what we have already. So, I think some of those could get pushed. And then Nantucket sewer, is that a done deal? Is that been decided that we're sewering Nantucket?
No, Matt, I'll jump in, Rick. In my email, I do have quite a backup. We have a report from Weston and Sampson as to an updated cost. And we are going to arrange them to give you all a presentation on it. And then you will need to decide at some point whether or not to proceed with that project. So no, it has not. It still needs board review.
Okay,
sort of like authorization to proceed through the process.
right. That's awesome. Thank you.
Can I chime in there, Libby? Being on Capcom for 4 years, we years ago debated, like, do we put things in there for out years just in case, just to see it, even though it's got to go through, so, select board's got to decide, it's got to pass town meeting, all that. So we decided to put it in there just to get a better view of what kind of could come. So that's why it's in there, Matt, even though we don't know.
I think it's way improved. I think that, looking out 10 years and, and once I pick myself up off the floor, once I see those numbers and I pick myself off the floor, I think I can look at the process and say the process is very much improved. I'm just trying to say how, the next question is, how can we afford it? And so that's going to be the, how can we do this? So but I think, I congratulate everybody. I think it's really well done.
Matt, oh, sorry, Melissa, I just want to comment something.
That's okay. That's okay, Libby. Go right ahead.
I was just going to say, with regard to your comment about the Park and Rec master plan, that is, and Jason, thank you for mentioning that some of these things are put in there as sort of placeholders, sort of things that aren't totally finalized yet. They may move out, but we don't want to lose track of them. And in the great scheme of things, we want to keep them on the radar. The Park and Rec master plan is going to need some additional review, I think, with not only the Park and Recreation Commission, but I think I need to have a discussion with the school. And we did talk a little bit about this last week when they came in with their campus-wide improvements specific to the athletic facilities. And we need to kind of get at the field usage and can we consolidate any of this stuff? And also the Tom Nevers area in the Park and Rec master plan was put forward before the FEMA sea level rise projections. And now that may be an entire area to totally revisit. So there are some things up in the air with this, but thank you guys for bringing those up.
Melissa?
Thanks, Jason. I think similarly to Matt, I do want to thank the committee and Rick for such thorough reporting to us. I think it gives us as select board members in the community a really good sense of these big decisions that we're going to have to sort of grapple with, and prioritization. Some great conversation is going to happen about which ones we can do first. And I do think we have some challenges that are immediate in front of us that have come up, and we want to make sure that we're pacing the projects out so that our citizens, our community members, we can afford it. So I thank you. This paints a really good picture. It's a little overwhelming to see that number, but I think it's a great, it paints a very clear picture for us. So thank you for your work on that.
Thank you, Melissa. It's a big number. And telling me, in Capcom, we see it too, the 235 million, but we have to look at it. We need to, prioritize it and grapple with that. What does it mean? People are going to take it different ways, but it's important to. I'm not saying that's why it wasn't done years and years ago, but it's kind of scary to look at those numbers, right? It's like it's almost better not to know, but we need to know. Matt?
Yeah, the other comment, and I'm happy to see sort of the housing getting recommended and getting priority. That will help us have employees to actually operate the town. So having those being looked at is a key, is key. And I also, earlier on the other one, on the other Brian's screens, on the other recommendations, I wouldn't be adverse to increasing the, by 2.5, what's going to the Affordable Housing Trust. We bump some things every year. That is a priority. I wouldn't be adverse to that either if we could fit that in when we get there.
Melissa, go ahead.
Thanks. I agree with you, Matt. And I also think it'll be important for us to chime in on, some prioritization of these projects on the outlay of when what needs to happen. I think you're right, Matt. Housing clearly rises to the top. And I also found in our operation budget projections that we were being really conservative with the rooms tax. And, you know, if, and I appreciate all the reasons why, but in these preliminary discussions, perhaps there's, you know, room to make that number more realistic and bump that up to the Affordable Housing Trust so that we can accomplish those goals more quickly, which will help feed progress on the other goals. So those were just some of my initial thoughts in looking at the numbers, but I think we have to have some sense of which of those capital projects are going to take priority for the community over some of the others, because we can't spend it all at once.
Thank you, Melissa. Anybody else? Libby, okay if I grab some public comment here? There's a hand up.
Sure, of course.
Erica, can we get Mr. Atherton? Go ahead, Rick.
Wait, Jason, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. A lot of numbers, a lot of good information. I just, hard to go back and kind of pick out a few comments from the totality of the report, but I jotted down three. One is on the revenue side. I think the impact of renting personal residences, whether you call it short-term rentals or whatever, is apparently quite impactful. I'm assuming, Brian, that the line item included there is the one that, you know, my recollection without bringing it up went from something like 3.5 to over 7. And I think if you broke the impact of those items on a separate line item, we all benefit. That's just an observation on the presentation. I have one old time request, which I'm going to make to the board, and that's that several years ago, there was a request to put reflectors in the Hummock Pond Road, the Nantucket Road, and the Pulpus Road. And I'm hearing an echo, and if that's not, hopefully that's not coming through to you guys. But at the time, it was going to cost, I don't know, $300,000, and the capital program and town administration thought it was far too expensive. I think it's a public safety issue. At the end of each one of those roads are private businesses that sell alcohol. And when we have fog and overcast and people are coming back during those times, I think those reflectors are a public benefit. We're willing to spend millions of dollars on new roads and all kinds of things, but this is a basic one that I think you ought to consider. It's going to have to come from you. In the past, it wasn't willing to come from the town administration. And I'm going to make one more comment on the increase in the cost of the marine building. I think the board ought to spend a little bit of time, I think, disassembling that building and reviewing your recommendation from the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee about the impact of sea level rise and where you're building new structures. So those are my three quick comments, Brian, or Jason, and I thank you for taking them. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rick. Any other comments, board members, staff? Okay. You cross out, Libby.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, next we've got review and issuance of requests for proposals for shooting range. And just to remind the board that your most recent action, which did take place in executive session on this matter, was to direct staff to prepare an RFP and when ready to place it on a board agenda as a kind of a public notification that the RFP is being issued. This was also discussed a couple of times last April and May. And I think what we would like to have is our attorney, Vicki Marsh, take us through the term sheet, just so that people can understand what the kind of terms of the RFP are. Vicki? And I don't know if you have to go through every single one, nothing that's
No.
routine
I'll highlight-
in an RFP.
Right, I'll highlight the important
Thank you.
aspects, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have. So the RFP that's being issued is going to be for a minimum 50-year term on a portion of the property that's 1 Shadbush Road. The Shadbush Road site is a 27-acre site, and as a result of the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, looking at the project and the site, the town would be leasing a 9-acre portion of this property, and then the balance of this site would have a permanent conservation restriction granted on it. It could go to the land bank or to another land trust, depending upon the negotiations and how they would work out. But that would be required by NHESP in order for us to be able to go ahead and use this site. The obligations that we're asking from the tenant, they would have to obtain a conservation and management permit from NHESP in order to be able to develop and use this site. They would also have to comply with a habitat management plan and an environmental stewardship plan, and would also have to fund an escrow fund that's required by NHESP for the cost of the habitat management plan. All of this needs to be done in order for a tenant to be able to use this particular site. In addition, the tenant would be required to obtain all the necessary permits for any construction and use of the property for a recreational shooting park. And lastly, they would also have to execute a ground lease with the town. We've prepared a draft ground lease that will be attached to this RFP, and we would request that the tenant be agreeing to execute the ground lease in substantially the form that it's in presently. Lastly, the town would be required to grant a conservation restriction on this property, on the 18 acres of the property. And the approval for not only the ground lease, but also for the town to grant a conservation restriction would be necessary at next year's 2022 annual town meeting. There are specific requirements that we're asking of the tenant. They would have to agree to comply with any and all federal and state laws and requirements in order for there to be testing for lead contamination of soil and water on the site. And they're going to be required to conduct periodic soil and water testing as would be required by NHESP and the town. And those reports would then be reviewed by the town as well as by the state. The town and the state can then require, in their discretion, that the tenant be required to remediate the site if in fact there are found to be high levels of unacceptable levels of lead or other contaminants found in the soil or the water. In addition, any of the tenant, if the tenant so chooses to construct any buildings on the site, the town would have to just approve of the plans that are being proposed. The structures or improvements that they could construct would be for shooting practices or training, as well as an archery range, storage shed, administrative training buildings, possibly a clubhouse or concession stand, and bathroom facilities. And all of these facilities would need to be ADA compliant. In addition, in addressing the questions about construction of buildings, the town is not requiring the tenant to make any improvements to the property, whether it be outdoor or indoor facilities that could be used by the tenant. But the tenant should also understand that we're not going to be giving any written approval of this project prior to the commencement of the construction. The tenant's going to have to obtain written approval from the town for any construction prior to the commencement of this project. However, we're not, it's our opinion at this time that in order for this project to be constructed, that the tenant will not have to comply with the Massachusetts public construction laws and the public works construction laws based upon the standards that are set in a particular case, which is the Brassi Development Corp versus the Attorney General's case. However, it's important that the tenant understand that they probably are going to be it would be advisable for them to go ahead and consult their own counsel as to any requirements and compliance that they may have to make with any of these public construction laws. In addition, the tenant's going to have a safety plan that's going to have first aid training for all of their personnel outlined, as well as the first aid equipment being located on the premises. And they're going to have to also outline to the town what their safety plan and training is for all of their personnel. In addition, they're going to have a budget that's going to be able to outline what their financing is going to be in order to be able to do any construction and management and operation of this project. As far as the leasing of this project, the town also is going to require that they deposit funds in an escrow account for the funding of the habitat management plan. And they are also going to have to provide insurance that is going to meet the requirements of the town's insurance coverage. The insurance coverage has been reviewed and recommended by the town's insurer. So we would be asking that the tenant be able to comply with the insurance requirements that are submitted. And then in addition, they're going to have to indemnify the town from any responsibility, liability, damages that may occur on the site as a result of any injuries, death, or damage from the conditions on the property, maintenance, repairs, use and operation of the project, as well as any installation and construction of any buildings on this site. I think that covered, lastly, they're going to have to be asked to submit detailed proposals with this RFP in response and be able to address any questions and concerns that the board may have with respect to construction of any projects, funding of any projects, experience that they may have in being able to manage and operate this facility. So I think that the RFP is very precise as far as its and detailed as far as its requirements that it's expecting of the tenant. And I think that the tenant will be able to determine whether or not they are going to be able to meet these requirements. I don't know if anyone has any questions as far as the RFP itself.
Any questions for Vicki? Before we go ahead, Melissa.
Thanks very much, Jason. Thank you, Vicki. That was a really clear summary book here in your email to the board. So thank you for that. I guess I just have a question. If any of the environmental protection laws evolve during the time of this lease, is the lease adaptable? Like they have to be in compliance with whatever the current rules are as those developed. Okay.
Yes,
Thank
they will. They're always going to be expected to comply with the laws as they go forward. So
great,
yes.
Great. Thank you so much for that.
Matt?
Yeah, I've got a couple. Is the conservation restriction that's required now partly, is the 18 acres because of the 9? Is that attached to the amount of acreage, or is any of it attached because of the use? Or is that anything you would have to do if you were putting a school out there, kids or something? Would you still have to put that much other land aside?
Right. NHESP has determined that due to the habitats that are out there, this is going to be a requirement for them to, have a sizable buffer, of land that's going to be preserved. So yes, this is part of their mitigation requirements.
Right. I guess the question, if it was not them, if it wasn't shooting, if it was some other use there, would the requirements be the same?
Probably depending upon how they would design the site. So this is based upon the way they've proposed a site for the shooting range. And so if we were to say, take the site and draw it up in such a way that we were only using, say, a 4-acre parcel that wasn't affected, perhaps the 18 acres would be less. It's based on how this site is currently being used for a shooting range, not because of the shooting range use.
But the size of the size of the use.
The location and the habitats that are affected. Yes.
I got you. So it's a specific use and the habitats and how it's being used. Okay. The other, I wouldn't cap it at 60,000 in the lease because we're entering an inflationary period, and and then they aren't going to get to 60 for a long time anyway. And by the time they get there, 60,000 is going to look like very little. So I would suggest that I personally wouldn't cap it. I've spoken to the, proponents and the opponents of this over the years. There was at one point a suggestion from the neighbors that they would fund an indoor range. That never came about. That wasn't accepted. But part of me thinks that this is going to go, we're going to possibly end up in the same whole mess out there that we've been in. So part of me almost wants to say, if people are going to fund the range for you, the indoor range, then you're required to move inside. I almost feel like that could be written into our RFP, and that takes care of some of a lot of the noise issues and everything else. It takes care of the funding issues for the guys that want to do this, and you don't have to move inside with the bows and arrows and stuff. That's fine with archery, but move inside with that. I think that might, if we were willing to put that in, I think it might, help encourage a solution to this rather than 10 more years of legal. So those are my comments.
That certainly in response to that point, if they're able to come up with some additional funding, that certainly is going to help. Obviously their construction, in a quicker pace than what they're possibly anticipating right now. So yes, I think that any outside funding for this would definitely help them.
Right, and which would be great. I just would like to, the funding I think is going to be tied to them going in, The other question I have is how, let's say we get 10 years out, 15 years out, and and the staff is getting continual noise complaints. How are those addressed in the lease? Who's going to be responsible to enforce, et cetera? Because I want to make sure we're not in a situation where, well, it's not in the lease, nothing we can do. It really didn't specify what staff is able to do this. I want to, is that taken care of?
So I can certainly include a provision in there that would specify, if the select board wants to oversee the complaints, that certainly we can provide that in the lease.
I'm not asking to oversee them. I'm asking how they're overseen, because it will, if they aren't overseen well, it'll end up Libby and Erica will be overseeing it. And I'm sure that is not something they want to be dealing with. So how is that envisioned and how will it be taken care of?
That's a good question. I think that if they're certainly in violation of any laws, bylaws, regulations, that certainly is a way they're required to comply with all of those, laws and bylaws. So if they're in violation of anything, that's certainly something that can be addressed. They can have fines, there could be penalties, fines. We can take them to court if we had to, if they were refusing to comply. So I think it would depend upon what the complaint is and the nature of the complaint.
Matt, are you asking what control does anybody have? If it's whatever, out of compliance or to put something in there? What are our options?
Well, I'm just asking, have we thought about our options and have we thought about how we're going to manage this? If in fact it becomes, if it becomes a, what if it's operating at hours that we have not been specified? I remember the lease, and the lease had specific hours and things, but if it's the wrong type of weapons are being fired there, if it's the wrong hours, if it's the wrong days, who's going to be responsible and what is the, we just want to I want to make sure that it's understood. It's, that we all are on the same page so that if when this happens, there isn't we didn't leave a loophole. We didn't leave something, we didn't tighten up something that we should have thought. We didn't think about something we should have thought about. That's all I'm saying.
So Matt, to your question, there are enforcement provisions in there. The select board are the lessors to this property. So they would be the board that would be enforcing the lease if they're not in compliance with any of the provisions of the lease, whether it's the times of operation, whether they're using the, unpermitted weapon, rifles, or have too many people on the site, or parking, or whatever their violations are. The board will be able to enforce the provisions in the lease. And like I said, if they fail to comply after giving them notice that they're, not in compliance with the lease, the town certainly can either, they can take them to court, force them to comply. We can terminate the lease. So there are provisions in there for the town to protect itself if need be. And I will, I'll just review the enforcement provisions again to make sure that there is all the protections that I feel that the town would need.
Thank you, Vicki. Any other comments from the board before we go to the public? Okay. Erica, can we go to the public? Whoever had their hand up first.
Yeah, hello. This is Edna Schwab. How are you? I'm a seasonal resident over here in Nantucket. And I have a couple of questions. One is, and I appreciate being able to speak before the board, and I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in everything that you've presented this evening, so thank you. But you mentioned that you're able to enforce certain aspects of this lease, such as noise remediation if needed, lead remediation, any other toxins. But have you conducted an environmental impact to understand how frequently such as noise needs to be monitored, or lead toxicity, or any other toxic metals that may be used in this shooting park?
Anybody here answer that question?
I don't know that the staff hasn't answered. No, we haven't done an environmental impact report on that, but I think as Ms. Marsh pointed out, any and all materials that are used as part of the facility that relate to that would have environmental impacts are going to be required to meet any DEP or other environmental criteria.
Who is going to develop the criteria that needs to be monitored? Certainly, if someone says, well, I'll check for lead, it's going to be every 2 years, then I'll check it in soil and water, and you find toxic levels, then how do you remediate? I think if you do your due diligence, you'll find plenty of research articles showing some of these facilities turning into Superfund sites that really aren't remediable. They're terrible looking. You look at them, it looks like something had demolished them. This is a very beautiful, pristine island. The ecosystem is extremely fragile, as you mentioned in multiple of your presentations previously. It really concerns me that if a shooting park and the rules of the shooting park are being delineated by the tenant, and they're saying this is what we feel is appropriate, how do we know what is appropriate? I rely on the experts, and you can tell me that someone who's a marksman is an expert. Certainly I'm not a marksman, and I trust I have confidence in the people that I work with, but there are plenty of articles in the last several months, especially from Dr. Wolf. And then you had a recent headline from Senator Markey looking at the EP, asking the EPA to conduct an impact study. And it just concerns me. Many times, just like your PFAS, these toxins become irreversible, and then you start chasing and you never get good control over it. And the people who are affected are the citizens of the island.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We go to Arthur Reed.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Attorney Arthur Reed and I have been engaged to represent some 38 and increasing neighbors and residents of the area who are very much concerned with this project. Specifically, in addition to noise, there's a great concern with the impact that the discharge of lead bullets will have upon the whole area, and the possibility, the likelihood of that having an impact upon the aquifer and the health damage that will cause to the residents of the island, particularly the children. I believe there may be some other people speaking from with more medical expertise than I. Let me focus on a couple of aspects of the RFP that's been presented to you for adoption. The first is the statement that the land is not suitable for any other purpose at this time. Well, I think that's patently untrue. I think that the land could certainly be used for other purposes. I mean, none of them are proposed specifically at this time. Matt hypothetically mentioned a school, if that were to go out there. I don't know if there's any likelihood that that would happen, but it's certainly a possibility that something could be done. There's always need for land for affordable housing. And even with potentially only 9 acres available out of the 27 on the site, there's certainly the possibility that an affordable housing project could be of some considerable size, if properly designed, could be done on that site within those 9 acres. I've heard suggestion that there would be a need for a mental health and substance abuse facility that might be able to be done on a site like this. Those are just hypothetical examples. There are any number of uses that the property could have that could be used for, and for really any municipal uses, as well as the ones that I've described. So I think that that's a statement that you're being asked to make that is just not the case. The other is the rent. As Matt pointed out, the rent is going to start at a very low level and then double every 5 years and get up to a level of potentially $60,000 a year. And by the time it gets to that point, $60,000 may amount to about $60 in today's money. So I think that there is a CPI factor in there, but it cuts off at the $60,000 level. I think that's inappropriate. But we're starting off at $3,000 a year. $3,000 a year for rent on a 27-acre parcel, of which 9 acres would be usable. I think that's absurdly low. I suppose that the idea here is to enable the developers of this project to have a low rent at the beginning so that they can develop the site to a greater extent with that, rather than having to pay rent for it. But I think that that's a level of preference being given to the operation that I think is completely inappropriate. And I think that before any minimum rent should be set on this, that there should be extensive work done to determine by appraisal what the rental value of the property is, whether the town is in fact getting a fair return from this private use of public property. I think that a lot of things need to be thought about. before you enter into the RFP, and whether in fact the RFP should be limited to a shooting park or whether some thought should be given to other more appropriate alternative uses, of which there could be several, before the disposition of the property is put out to the to private people to enter into a lease. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. We have a lot of people with their hands up tonight, so if I can ask everybody to be, try not to repeat what somebody else has said and try to be as short as possible, just so we can get to everybody tonight. Thank you. Emily Molden's up next.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden here with the Nantucket Land Council. I just have questions about a couple of items. One, I think it was maybe Matt who had mentioned that in some of your previous discussions, maybe in April of this year, I know the board was contemplating, again, the possibility of having an indoor range or have some of the facilities being moved to an indoor facility. And I know there was some executive session discussion, but I just kind of wondered if there was clear reasoning for why that's no longer being pursued or contemplated at this time, or if it really just has more to do with the individual RFPs that you end up ultimately receiving. That would be my first question. And then the second one is more specific to one of the provisions of the lease, which is the requirement for the lead monitoring and management. I did provide a letter to the board, I think it was back in April, with a consultant's review of some of the proposals around environmental impacts to the site. And I was just kind of curious, the section that talks about the lead monitoring and management contemplates that the individual proposals must also include a proposal for the lead monitoring and management that would be reviewed and approved by both the town and NHESP. And I wondered if, when that is provided, if that's a document that would then be available to the public for review and comment, and if not, who from the town would ultimately review that to sign off on it and approve on whatever the planned monitoring and management would be.
Thank you, Emily. I think you might be able to comment on the second part, lead management. The review, is that public? Who reviews it?
So the initial plan itself is going to get probably reviewed by NHESP, because that's part of their environmental stewardship plan. So they would be overseeing it. If they feel that we need to have more frequent testing, we certainly could take direction from the state in order to be able to meet their requirements. And so I think that there will be some public oversight by the state, obviously, and in any hearings that we may have to conduct in order to be able to, adequately monitor this site. So I think that there is going to be an opportunity for the public probably to be able to see these documents, but initially they're going to be reviewed by the state, and they're going to be the ones that we're going to be looking to for their guidance, such as DEP and NHESP as well.
Okay. And the first question, Libby might be able to help remind me of the indoor range, why it came out the way it did, or maybe another board member.
Vicky might actually help with that. I think the door is open for an indoor range.
Correct. They're not required to construct any facilities on this property. Certainly if their plan and in their proposal, they can certainly propose that they're going to construct indoor facilities. We've allowed, they will be allowed to do that. But it's certainly not a requirement by the town for them to do that.
Matt?
Yeah, in my discussions previous, for them, from the shooting shooting hunting association, from their perspective, it's a cost situation. It's expensive to do that, and it's expensive to build, expensive to construct. I don't think they had the funding for that to start. So, but I'm not sure they're adamantly opposed to it, but especially if it's funded by elsewhere. But I think the goal is to get this up, get this constructed up and running, sooner rather than later, and this could take it longer. But if Stephen Holgate came on and talked about it, it'd be great. He could tell us.
Thank you, Matt. I think we're ready to go to the next comment. Carl Marcy.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I wanted to comment on the fact that we're looking forward with this RFP and thinking and contemplating a 50-year lease. But there's been very little discussion about the stewardship by the NHA over the last 10 years. And I think Edna Schwab's comment, which was glossed over, is really important. My question is, how many tests have been conducted on the land over the last 10 years? And I believe the answer is going to be 0. And I believe you all will say, well, that's because they actually didn't build anything because it was tied up in the courts. And it was tied up in the courts because it's very controversial. But we know for a fact that people have been using that land over the last 10 years. We have video evidence from my front yard of people shooting guns on that property. And we have independent third-party witness to fresh shells on a makeshift berm and lead soil samples that are at toxic levels up to 8 times what's acceptable in that area. So I deeply, deeply request that the select board does its job monitoring the last 10 years of lease before you let this RFP go forward. And if you don't test it, we will find someone who will. Thank you.
So can we go to Stephen Holgate?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Steve Holgate, current president of the County Association.
Stephen, it's hard to hear you. You're a little muffled.
Okay.
Is that just me?
Can you hear me now?
It's really hard. You're muffled for some reason.
Sounds like you're on speakerphone or something, Stephen.
Yeah, I have everything unmuted. I'm not sure why it's doing that. My apologies.
I mean, I can turn my volume way up and I can hear you.
Click on everything. I can't find why my microphone's not working. My apologies. How about now? No, it's not good.
Maybe he could hang up and try back in.
I'll try that. I'll try hanging up, coming back in. No.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll go to the next one and then get back to you when I see you come back up. Okay, go to Alan Reinhardt.
Thank you for the time. This is 29 acres of public land. And basically, the only people that will be able to access this property is if they are members of the Nantucket Hunt Club or their guests who will probably be invited from off island to bring their guns over here. My main issue with the whole idea of a shooting range here is the noise. I spent 30 years living over near Quidnet, and every time there was gunshots over there, the sound just carries all the way across the moors. The last time, well, when walking on the moors during the day and to hear gunfire is not part of the experience that I think we want people who are out enjoying the conservation properties to understand. It seems as though where this is public land, we have a number of much higher value uses for it. Arthur touched on a few of them. In terms of expanding the commercial operations that are going on down there, I think that would be a much better use of the property. There's certainly a demand for that. We could move some of the commercial operations that are in town or near town out to an area like that. Even there's been talk about moving the DPW. That would be a good location out by the airport. The transportation is better and so on. Affordable housing, of course, because there is public transportation out on Milestone Road and so on. The idea of renting this property for $3,000 a year for the first whatever years and so on, it just seems as though from a financial point of view, it makes no sense whatsoever. Why are we supporting a private club, which is essentially what this would be? You would have to be a member in order to set foot on that, anywhere on that 27 acres of land. It's a beautiful piece of land. If you haven't been out there to walk some of the trails that cross the land, and that's another concern if people are shooting guns out there, there are a number of walking trails out there on the land as well. The archery component of it seems, apparently that's the reason for needing so much land, is because they need the archery range and so on. It would seem as though that could be accomplished somewhere else. The oversight, I predict that the select board would be inundated with complaints once they start up and the gunfire starts out there, and people, particularly visitors to the island, are saying, well, what's going on? So anyway, I really strongly urge you to reconsider the depth of this RFP that you're proposing, a 50-year proposal to almost like giving away public land. I think there are much higher and better uses for that land than for a shooting range. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to make a quick suggestion. I see still a lot of hands up. I know this is a very important item. I want to give the Town Government Study Committee report some time. There's some really good discussions there, things that could go on future town meetings. Just make a suggestion to the board and to John. Are you okay to moving this next week so we don't fly through this or yours, John? We have a shorter meeting next week. We don't have a lot of agenda items. Is the board okay with that? I'm okay staying late too. I'm getting a thumbs up. John, are you okay with that? I see you on here.
John Giorgio.
No, John Brescher.
Oh, John Brescher, sorry.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so let's. I'm just gonna. I saw some thumbs up from board members. Let's move it to next week. If anybody has John's number, give him a call or text him. And anybody else who was here for government study, we're gonna move that to next week, just so we can have time to discuss this. Thank you, everyone. Okay, Stephen Holgate's back in. Can we go to Stephen next and see if that sound audio is a little better?
Hey, how are we hearing me now?
Much better. Thank you.
All right. Yep, sorry about that. Yeah, I just had a really brief question. I just noticed in the proposal, it mentions attaching a copy of a draft lease that I guess would be very representative of the potential final lease after town meeting vote. But it does also mention in here that this RFP would go out and be accepted prior to, or possibly prior to the annual town meeting. It mentions it being attached, the lease being attached in here. So I just wanted to make sure that that was just going to be a draft lease, and the final lease obviously could not be attached because it wouldn't be written and approved at town meeting until after the RFP. That might just need a clarification. And if I could just hit on a couple of the comments that were made tonight, just for clarification purposes. I know noise was mentioned briefly, but I just wanted to make sure that people know in the years that we had the lease and tried to do the development of the shooting range, noise was one of the main issues that was brought up both at the planning board. We had noise consultants from both our side and the opposition side, and it went all the way through the court system. The planning board's decision was appealed, went to land court, went to appeals court, and the decision from the planning board was upheld. So I think the noise issue has been dealt with, and we're under the town bylaws. And I think to keep addressing it is just a delay tactic, and it's going to keep this project from never happening. As far as the lead goes, there are documents out there that we were following, whether if we don't get this RFP and someone else does, I encourage them to follow the same documents, but the Environmental Protection Agency actually publishes their own publication that is the recommended best practices for lead mitigation or lead management at shooting ranges. There may be a newer edition out now. That would be what we would use to build our lead mitigation devices. And as far as the old site, while we were trying to develop it, we had signed it off. We tried to keep people from shooting there because of the land permit was still in work. If there were people shooting out there, it was unknown to us. But I think people also get mixed up with the original range, the old unofficial range that we tried to include in our lease years ago when we gave up that portion of the land to help mitigate and help get some other town projects developed. That land is where the old train trestle used to be, further to the east of our leased property. So there very well could be some lead contamination there. We did do a well to test the water back when we had that as part of our leased property, but we never did get any test results from that. The town's more than welcome, obviously, to test that site, but that is now not part of the parcel we lease. And whether people still get out there and shoot, I don't know. So there's no easy access to it. And Matt was correct on the indoor range proposals. We have not objectionable to an indoor range at all. It is the cost factor. We've been without a range for a place to shoot for so long that we need to get a shooting range up and running so that the shooting activities don't have to be spread out all over the island. People trying to find their own makeshift thing. So we were going for the quickest way to build a range and still keep it safe with the no blue sky designs with baffles so the bullets don't exit the range. And then when we had more funding in the future, we were going to expand an indoor range underneath the basement or in the basement of the administration building. Hope potentially up to 50 yards long. That would take a lot of the shooters off the outdoor 25 and 50 yard ranges and move them indoors, significantly reducing the amount of shooters that could be heard shooting. There was a proposed 100 yard long range, so hunters could sight in their hunting rifles. They typically receive less shooting activity at ranges. That would be harder to enclose, more expensive because it's so long. Not that it can't be done, but again, we wanted to at least have a place to shoot while the indoor range was being designed, developed, and funded. And the comment about it being private use only, public land for private use, that's not true. I don't know if this RFP makes that requirement, but in the previous lease, it did say that it had to be open for public, not just private members. And that would be, if our proposal would definitely state that. And I think that is all I had. If there's anything I can help answer, I'd be more than happy to.
Comments or questions for Steve while he's here? Question for Vicky. Is that in the RFP that it has to be open to the public? Our current RFP?
We were under the impression that the club that the hunting association was going to have a members only with open to the public for certain different types of events that they would hold. And they also were going to offer some training and practice shooting for law enforcement on the property. So that would enable people to also, from outside of their private club to be able to use it. But the understanding that I had was that the board was always going to just want it to be, private except for events, and not have the general public coming and shooting there, who may not be trained and supervised and, all of that. So that was the reason.
Thank you, Vicky. Dawn?
I guess my question on that would be, I think that there are some important things in terms of having to sort of have it be checked out in regard to being a member and having an application process, but are there going to be any, I would be concerned if there were barriers to people being able to join. I know that obviously there's always time and space limitations. We're seeing that at Maya Comet Golf, but it should be accessible across the board to people to be able to sign up for a membership and fill out all of the proper paperwork and pay the membership fee and whatever is required, which would be kind of similar to what happens at the paddle courts, which is on land bank property. So that would just be my comment in regard to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Dawn. Anything else? Okay, thank you, Stephen. Go to Debbie Soffit.
Hi, would it be okay to first go to Dr. Alan Wolf, who I believe is waiting in the queue? Do you see him?
I do.
Would it be okay if I give him my spot first because he is
Sure, you can log off right now.
okay, but I would love to come back afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, go to the next one. Everybody, please state your name when you come on. I might have got it wrong.
Thank you very much. This is Alan Wolf. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Great. I really want to thank the board for the opportunity to come and address you on this issue. And let me just state for the record who I am. My name is Alan Wolf. I'm a pediatrician. I am not a resident of Nantucket. I'm a resident of Massachusetts, and I have visited your beautiful island, unfortunately, only a few times. So I don't have any direct stake in this process. But I am the director of the New England Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Unit. I'm also the director of the Pediatric Environmental Health Center at Boston Children's Hospital and a professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. And I see children with lead poisoning in my clinic weekly. We see around 300 to 350 families for this illness each year. I would just like to make a couple of comments and make sure that I've brought this to the board's attention. And that is outdoor gun ranges have been listed by the EPA as the source of the highest amount of environmental lead pollution. Millions of pounds of lead per year are estimated to be dispersed on outdoor firing ranges, more than other industries such as chemical and chemical product manufacturing, stone, clay, and glass manufacturing, electric utilities, or electric equipment manufacturing. The estimated pollution from outdoor gun ranges that are relatively unregulated is the highest amount of environmental lead pollution, greater than all those industries. In fact, outdoor gun range use has been found to contribute to environmental lead pollution in easily graded amounts. That is, the more rounds are fired per client, the more thousands of pounds of excess lead are deposited on the outdoor gun range. So if you're firing 20 rounds per client, that's less lead deposited than 50 rounds per client, which is less lead deposited than 80 rounds per client. But cumulatively, the amount of lead that's deposited runs into the tens of thousands of pounds in an outdoor gun range. I want to bring to the board's attention two instances, one in Agawam, Massachusetts, back in 2008, the Agawam Sportsman's Club. The Agawam Sportsman Clubs went under and abandoned the property, which was 5.5 acres. It had an indoor range as well as an outdoor range on the property. After it was abandoned by the Sportsman's Club, it was unclear who owned it, but it did abut town land. 19 soil samples were taken at that land. All of them contained lead in a range of 40,000 to 120,000 milligrams per kilogram. For comparison, the EPA limits for residential soil is 400 milligrams per kilogram. And comparative soils in Massachusetts are 300 milligrams per kilogram. Besides lead at the Agawam Sportsman's Club, there was also arsenic found in 11 out of 19 samples at levels as high as 1,200 milligrams per kilogram. The ATSDR lists arsenic and antimony safe levels below 20 milligrams per kilogram for children. Antimony was also found in 14 out of 19 samples as high as 2,900 milligrams per kilogram, well over the accepted amounts by over 200 times. That was in Agawam. And then there was another incident at the Athol Rod and Gun Club in 2009. This was 19 acres in Athol, Massachusetts. The Athol Rod and Gun Club went bankrupt in 2004. The town purchased the land from a trust, and then it did soil sampling on the land, and it found the maximum concentration of soil plugs that were taken in those 19 acres at 120,000 milligrams per kilogram. Again, the EPA limit is 400 milligrams per kilogram. In addition, there were other toxicants detected at that site, probably from gunpowder or other materials. They detected antimony, arsenic, nickel, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So I just want to add my voice as one who is not a resident of the island and is dispassionate, but very much a believer in environmental science. I think the bottom line for the board to address is Nantucket is already dealing with a man-made source of environmental pollution, and that is PFAS and contaminated drinking water at Nantucket Airport. Why would Nantucket continue to support a second non-essential man-made source of environmental pollution and an ongoing threat to both its children and adults by a dust and drinking water lead hazard? And why would Nantucket support an unregulated toxic waste site that certainly poses an expensive cleanup? Those are the comments that I wish to bring to the board's attention. And again, I really appreciate the time you've allowed me.
Thank you, Dr. Wolf. We go to the next person. Just to let everybody know, please try to keep your comments to something that's not already been said. And I'm taking good notes on all this, and we are listening. So next up.
Hi, this is Rich Schwab. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you, Rich.
Hey, so I'm Ed and his wife, and I'm also a physician. And I'm just going to really quickly, I do think that it would be wise for the select and for this RFP to require an indoor site. I think you heard from Dr. Wolf that the risks here are enormous to the aquifer, to our health, to everyone, the drinking water. If lead gets into the aquifer, this island is going to be in big trouble. There could easily be a Superfund site. We went through all the economics earlier in the evening, and you can't imagine the cost of this cleanup. And if you require an indoor site, this all goes away. The noise issues go away, the lead issues go away. And it's just surprising to me that in an island that's so environmentally conscious, you guys do everything right, that you wouldn't mandate an indoor range. I think that everybody wins. The hunting association wins, they get to shoot, the environment wins, everybody wins. And it just seems to me that should be a requirement. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rich. Go to the next one.
Jason, I just pushed the button. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Rich.
I'd like to make just a couple of observations and maybe share with everybody a little history from my perspective. I was on the board when the lease agreement and this whole issue first came forward. I spent personal time, and I'm also speaking not only to the select board, I'm speaking to Steve Holgate, dealing with members of the hunting club to negotiate the lease, which I personally helped negotiate through the Board of Selectmen at that time and approving the lease. But I have to tell you all that times have changed in the past 10 years. Nantucket's different. The issues of our current residents and summer population are different. And I think it's time for the board, and I'm addressing you and your fellow members, Jason, to sort of face the question right now and not delay. My impression of this RFP is it's designed to delay the decision. I think it's time for the board to only recommend an indoor facility. It will benefit everybody. And speaking to the Hunting Association, I'm confident the money can be raised. You have lots of supporters on the island. And the people who live in the neighborhood have said they would support that. We'll see whether they step up or not. But Jason, the reason for my comment is I think the board should address that right now or next week, and not just if you issue an RFP that carries this out for the next, year, 2, 3, 5 years. I think we all get the issues here. And as I said before, from my experience on the board, times have changed, and I think that's the proper solution for you as a select board to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I'd like to go to people we've not heard yet, and then we'll try to go to people who've already spoken really quick. We got to wrap this up at some point because we need to have a discussion at the board. So if we go to Debbie Soffin first.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to introduce Dr. Wolf, because I don't think anyone could have said it better than him. He is a world-renowned expert in this. I'm just a general pediatrician, but I will tell you that I have taken care of children with lead toxicity, and I will tell you that once you're exposed to lead, there's really nothing that you can do. I will also tell you that once the lead gets into the water, whether it's our own wells in the neighborhood or if it got into the aquifer, that's it. There is nothing we can do about it. So it's really important that everyone listens to this, these facts. And as much as everyone wants to believe that best practices are going to keep everyone safe, if you look at what has happened all across the country, best practices do not translate into no issues. It's a good name. It sounds good, but you're hoping that everything will be fine, and it's not going to be. So we're going to, if the island allows us to go through as planned, this will be an issue that if we don't deal with it, our children will deal with it. And it is a devastating problem. I'm imploring you all to please don't issue this RFP. Please, if the NHA wants a shooting range, it needs to be an indoor shooting range with proper ventilation and proper safety, so that they themselves don't get lead toxicity and bring it home to their own families. But we shouldn't poison this beautiful island and the people who love it. And I really thank you for allowing me to say this once again. I've said it for the last several years. I'm hoping you guys do the right thing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Go Janine Randolph next.
Hello, this is Janine Randolph. You may have heard my voice. I spoke in the April meeting about alternative use because I had stumbled across some funding for someone to build a community that was focused on wellness and to drive year-round jobs in that particular area. And so it was a substantial project that I was trying to get the board to take in consideration. And I had been watching this land for a very long time because before we purchased on Nantucket, we rented a house in that area. Unfortunately, the house is contaminated with the PFAS water, and I have small children, and so I had to leave that area. And unfortunately, my children was drinking that water before we had it tested and realized what's going on. But I did, since I have been following this so closely because I have an alternative vision for this land that would definitely be an economic boom, more so than a shooting park, I got a hold of the judge's ruling because Stephen Holgate keeps saying that this issue for noise is settled. It is not. We have standing. And what does that mean? That means what the judge said was, look, this thing isn't built and I can't give a ruling about noise for something that isn't built. However, if it gets built and there is noise or any of these other issues, then you have a right to come back and re-sue. And that's what that lawsuit says. So the minute he builds this and there are noise issues, then anyone who wants to sue him is cleared to do so. And that is what the case says. And it takes a long time to read it because obviously I'm not a lawyer. But I think that people need to understand that we have standing. And so Steve Holgate keeps saying that it's settled. It was settled that day at that time under certain circumstances, but the door is wide open. And Matt Fee said it best. If they don't do an indoor range, it's going to open floodgates again. And keep in mind, it was a small group of doctors that was involved in that last lawsuit. You're going to be able to hear this for 5 miles. And how do I know that? Because I was in the military. I spent my life growing up at shooting ranges. I know a lot about guns and I know about the noise. I know all about them. And you're going to be able to hear that all over the island. And I am very concerned about this land being used for entertainment when, as everybody has said, there are so many other uses. And it just mystifies me that since 1988, first it was going to be for entertainment for a golf club, and it was ruled that it wasn't suitable because it was going to destroy the habitat. And I thought surely at that point they would open this up to something that wasn't going to destroy the habitat. And then I was shocked to see that the next lease from the town was a shooting park. So I really think we need to take a serious look about why this land has been designated for entertainment when clearly in all these years, the island has changed and the needs of the island has changed. And this RFP has been behind closed doors. I tried to attend a meeting and I couldn't. And I just think that that is not government for the people, by the people. And right now you've had the advantage of not a lot of people know this because everybody I talk to, I say, hey, there's going to be a shooting range in Nantucket. Oh, they would never do that. They're too much concerned about the environment and there's only one aquifer. They would never do it. You're nuts. But I'm not nuts. I mean, I can't believe this is happening, but it is happening. So if you are going to use this land at such low, below market rates, then it's got to be an indoor range. But quite frankly, I wish you would allow it to be used for something else in the wellness space, because the economics on Nantucket and the year-round jobs that we could create would be so much better. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two more hands up. Two people have already spoken. If you could be very brief, because we need time for the select board to discuss this. Emily Molden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emily Molden. I appreciate the opportunity for a quick follow-up. Just in relation to the question I asked previously on, I think it's under section 4.
Sorry, accidentally threw her out, but I brought her right back in.
Sorry,
No
Emily,
worries.
cut off there.
That's okay, no worries, thank you. So just in relation to the lead monitoring and management plan that would be proposed by the applicants or in the proposals, it references that these this management or monitoring would be approved by the town, and it specifically references NHESP. And I wanted to bring that up because there has been some discussion about DEP playing a role in that, who may be a much more appropriate entity to be approving that type of a plan, because Natural Heritage is really more involved with rare species, and I'm not sure that they're the correct state agency to be referencing in the lease. So I wanted to bring that to your attention so that maybe that could be adjusted going forward. And I certainly would support a requirement for an indoor facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Steve Holgate. This is the last public comment we're going to take for the night, or at least for now.
Okay, thank you for calling on me again. I just wanted to make one clarification for the board. If everybody's considering going to indoor only, just remember that there is a shotgun usage. Probably one of the more popular types of shooting would be shotgun shooting at the clay pigeons, clay targets. Our previous plan was to build a trap range only, a skeet range. Most people think of it as skeet. That's very difficult to enclose. So if people go down the avenue of making restriction of indoor only, that's going to nix that. So we want to make sure that that might be an exception to an indoor. That's it. That was all for additional info.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I want to give us the board some time to digest and talk about this a little bit. Any initial thoughts from staff as well? They could be able to speak. Just to get us going, correct me if I'm wrong, Libby, in 2004, 2005, this past town meeting, is that correct? With not a lot of opposition?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. And I know, yes, the times have changed. That was 15, 17 years ago. Okay, clarification or process issue. I'll get to you in a second, John. So whether we pass this RFP or we change it tonight, what is the process? It goes out, what goes to town meeting, and what is decided at town meeting? Just for clarification. John or Libby?
I would defer to John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is actually the comment that I wanted to make. So, the ultimate, what would happen is you'd issue the RFP, you would receive proposals, and those proposals would be evaluated, and you could get to the point where there was a recommended most advantageous proposal. But before that lease can be awarded, town meeting has to authorize the 50-year lease. And the question about whether or not this is a suitable use of the property is ultimately a question for a town meeting to decide. And I think that's important to emphasize. If town meeting does not authorize this lease, then this project is not going to go forward. So we had talked earlier about, should you go to town meeting first, see if the town is interested in leasing this property for a shooting range, and then issue the RFP? And I think the board concluded that in order to have a meaningful discussion at town meeting, there has to be a specific proposal in front of the town to consider. And that's the purpose of the RFP, to get that specific proposal, negotiate the terms of the lease, and then you go to town meeting, and town meeting's going to make this decision.
Okay, thank you, John. Christy?
Thanks. So just a clarification question about it going to town meeting. Could changes to the RFP take place on the town meeting floor? Or is whatever we pass, whether it's tonight or at a future meeting, is that what would have to go through?
Chrissy, I think that's going to depend on a couple of things. You know, when you issue an RFP, it's for a specific project that is identified and evaluated in the RFP process. Now, if there's only one proposal that's received, I think the select board has a much more discretion in terms of negotiating those terms than if you had more than one proposal, because you have to be careful about ensuring fair competition here. So the question that will arise, so I think what you're getting at, if town meeting says we will only approve this on condition that that the shooting range occur indoors, I think you want to be able to have the option of awarding a contract on that, at least on that basis. And so that would be important that the RFP include that as a possibility. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Melissa?
Thank you, Jason. You know, I feel very conflicted. I believe that the Hunting Association has in earnest tried to pursue this for these 17 years, and they have been thwarted, I think, to use Steve's words, with a lot of delay tactics and lawsuits to stop it from going forward. And you know, and at the same time, our community has changed. And I wonder if there's any benefit to, I understand in the RFP, there's the flexibility to include or to build an indoor range, but could there be a requirement within a period of time, say within 15 years, that there is an indoor range built on the site, giving the Hunting Association and hopefully the neighbors time to fundraise and start that, but also allow them the opportunity to provide safe shooting on the island. I think we have a lot of rogue shooting that happens right now, and that's, in my opinion, much more unsafe and much more unwieldy than what we would find if we have a safe, contained, permitted space. So that's somewhat what I'm thinking right now, and I wonder, Vicki and John, if that's appropriate to put in an RFP.
So I think the RFP could certainly include a requirement that that an indoor shooting range be constructed and used within a certain period of time from the date of the award of the lease. And that could be a requirement that all shooting be moved indoors by X date. Okay. And of course, if they can't achieve that, then the lease would terminate.
Okay.
So the RFP right now has a provision in it that states that the tenant would be required to come to the board with plans to be able to construct a building or facilities within 5 years from the date of the award. And then they have 10 years in order to construct the building, to commence construction of the building. So that's already there, if in fact they decide to go ahead and construct some indoor facilities. But there isn't a requirement right now that they do
I
that.
understand. Okay, thank you, Vicky. So that's something that if we, through our discussion, we wanted to amend and make that a requirement rather than a suggestion, we could do that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Matt?
Yeah, the suggestion I made earlier was to require an indoor range if the neighbors or others provided the money. Because what I'm worried about, if we require it, I'm not sure the hunting association's ever gonna be able to raise enough to do it. And if we don't, and if you know, I'm not sure they're gonna get the money. I also think that the incentives are wrong. You know, right now, neighbors have offered some money for this. So I think, you know, is there a way, and instead of spending money on lawyers, no offense, John, but instead of everyone spending money on lawyers and fighting this for another 10 or 15 years, you too, Vicky, what could we do? You know, is there a way to put an indoor facility, indoor facility there soon so that we can get some of the rogue shooting under control and put tight limitations on outdoor shooting so it's done in a safe way, and it's only done when it's, you know, at the right time during hunting season or during the off season. One of the problems, I get very worried about these RFPs. This isn't about this, but just in general, the high bidder gets it or the most use gets it. This isn't something we want to have, you know, a bunch of people from off island come over and shoot skeet because they can't on the Cape anymore. Let's go to Nantucket. We don't want that all summer long. It would be terrible for the economy. It would be terrible for the entire island. And so the goal would be get it inside, you know, and maybe maybe once that's constructed, there's a potential to shoot outside limited times of year as long as it doesn't hurt the environment. You know, there's time, but I'm not sure, you know, something along those lines, because I think if we continue as we're going, we're going to get the same result we've had. You know, I think, anyway, those are my thoughts.
John?
So one of the things we haven't discussed tonight, and this is something that where the RFP has not been completed, but as you are very well familiar with other RFPs, you have to establish evaluation criteria, and you rate proposals on those specific criteria: highly advantageous, advantageous, or not advantageous. So one of the things the board could consider doing is including an evaluation criteria that says an indoor shooting range will be highly advantageous. An outdoor shooting range would be something less than highly advantageous. And that would provide an incentive, I would think, for proposers to, you know, as Matt's indicating, maybe looking for some additional funding so that they could submit a proposal that was highly advantageous, and then the award could be made on that basis. There's not, if that doesn't happen, and if there's no proposal for an indoor shooting range submitted, then the board could certainly say, no, we're not going to award the contract, even if it's only one proposal, because it's not highly advantageous to the town. And then it wouldn't even have to go to town meeting. So that is an option you could consider in crafting the evaluation criteria.
Thank you, John. So are you saying that we haven't got to that point yet? We haven't created those criteria, advantageous, highly advantageous, and that still needs to happen before it goes out?
Yes.
Okay.
And so it could be as simple as construction within the first 5 years, highly construction immediately, highly advantageous within the first 5 years, advantageous, more than 5 years, not advantageous. So we could certainly include that as a evaluation criteria.
Thank you. So let me get another, just kind of bring us all kind of back. Tonight, we're not deciding to, or are we? to say, we're going to go forward with this RFP, make a couple adjustments and off it goes. So that is an option.
Yes,
Okay. Or we could go back to the, not go back to the drawing board, but say we'd like to see this, this, and this, and then bring it back another time.
yes.
Okay. What is the board feeling right now?
You go ahead, Don, if you're raising your hand.
Oh, sorry, Don, Melissa.
I
Yeah,
don't
go
want
ahead.
to. I don't want to outrage you.
I was just going to say, I feel like we did hash out a lot of these conversations before to get to this draft, and that there will be a reevaluation once the proposal is written, or proposals. And then the rating scale, as John discussed, in regard to all of the things we've been talking about. But I feel like ultimately we have an obligation to take this back to town meeting, because this was voted before, and town meeting may choose to not follow this current path with competing interests on the island. But I mean, I do think that, as Melissa stated, there is a need for this. We have a significant hunting population on the island, and there is shooting going on in an uncontrolled way for people to practice. So I do see that benefit. I also, see many things that we're lacking that land could be used for. So I'd like to just move this forward and get it back, get the proposals, get them evaluated, go through the proper process, and then ultimately bring it back to town meeting.
Thank you, Don. Melissa?
Thank you, Jason. I guess through you, maybe a question back then is to you, Don, would be the suggestion to just move the RFP forward as it is, or do we want to entertain adding some requirement to the RFP of a timeline rather than a suggestion, a requirement of a timeline to meet funding goals to build the indoor range?
Go ahead, Don.
John, did you have a suggestion? Sorry, before I go.
I'm sorry, was that a question for me?
It's for Don.
I think it was more of a conversation
Sorry.
with fellow board members. Thanks, John.
Yep.
I would be completely supportive of an indoor facility, but what happens if the funding's not available? I mean, I would think that whoever puts this proposal together is going to have a preference for having some part of it be indoors, because then it can be utilized on a year-round basis. It would definitely be the optimal way to do it, but then there is the competing interest of the rifle shooting that apparently can't easily be done indoors.
Melissa, go ahead.
Thanks. I guess my sentiment really is that, by making it a requirement, not a suggestion, if there's not enough capital raised to do that within and accomplish that within, I'm thinking broadly 15 years, but, some period of time, then perhaps, the shooting range in and of itself, I mean, either future boards will have to deal with that, or maybe the project itself is not sustainable and doesn't continue to meet the community goals. But I'm hearing very strongly from constituents, even those who support shooting range on Nantucket, that an indoor range is the preference. So to me, putting some kind of time requirement into the RFP acknowledges the fact that the NHA, who I'm assuming is going to have the winning proposal, needs to get started so that they have leverage to raise the capital funding they'll need to be successful. If they're stopped right now and asked to raise the money before they develop anything, it won't be successful. I think we've heard that very clearly. So in my mind, the requirement's a bit of a compromise to that.
Don, do you have any thought?
I'm fine with that. I mean, I know that we had talked about this in regard to how the proposal was originally crafted with the 5 years and 10 years to try and encourage that to be the main part of this. But I guess my one question sort of back to the board is, what about the other piece of it, with the necessity for outdoor shooting of one of the components?
Thank you, Don. Christy, and then Matt.
Just to respond to Melissa's question, I am thinking that it could be part of the ranking and the advantageous to have it built within 15 years rather than changing the RFP to require that it, the language states that it needs to be built within a certain time frame, or that an indoor facility, has to be part of the RFP. Obviously, that would implement or affect how we rate it, but it wouldn't be something that would be stated clearly in the RFP.
Matt?
I think our goal, what you're, I'm fumbling for my words, but our actions show what our actions will speak louder than words. Our actions are show what our priorities are. And if we bring this to town meeting, that means that this is our priority for that site. That means that this is more that we have, if we go to a town meeting, we shouldn't be going to town meeting if it isn't our priority, and if there's other things that, housing or DPW or anything else that, we have chosen to not talk about those, to not do those, and to do this, so that's that. Unfortunately, that's the way this works. And so I think, I'm having a hard time when I think about those things, supporting 27 acres for this one use. Now, if this were indoor and it were, 5 acres and we had 22 others, some for mitigation and some potentially to move the DPW, and then I'd be all for it. But I'm having a hard time right now, sort of, what are our priorities? I think things have changed. And I think if we say, well, you can build it, but build it in 5 years, build it in 10. Things are going to be completely different even in 10 years at the rate we're going. And so I think that we've got to think about, I think the indoor is way preferable. And so how do we, whatever we do, we should find a way to get it indoor.
Thank you, Matt. Everybody, my 2 cents, I think we need to do something to incentivize the indoor faster than 15 years, at least in 10 minimum. And I agree with some of what the board members said of taking it to town meeting and getting something with think of the criteria and setting some suggestion that you made, John, of if it does end up being one proposal, then allowing us to move on town meeting floor if we need to. And it still might not pass, but trying to set us up to be as flexible as possible. And then if it doesn't pass, it doesn't. And if it does, we've changed, adapted a little bit. John?
So I think it's important, and I know you all know this, but none of us are experts on the economics of how this is going to work. And so if you want to maintain the flexibility, my suggestion would be, again, include an evaluation criteria that requires ultimately the construction of a building within a certain period of time. And if you include that in the RFP as an evaluation criteria, then I think that's going to give you room to negotiate with whoever submits a proposal to come up with something that makes sense for the town and that the board would be comfortable going before town meeting and recommending approval on, because that's ultimately what's going to happen here. So, we could certainly say, and this is just a suggestion, but it's highly advantageous that an indoor range be constructed prior to operation of the facility. It's advantageous if that building is constructed within 5 years, and it's not advantageous if it's constructed within 10 years. Even under that last scenario, the board would still have the authority and the ability to award to a proposer, even if they don't score, even if they score not advantageous on one of the criteria.
Melissa?
It sounds like that perhaps that may be the direction that we're moving in, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but my concern with using it as the ranking criteria is sort of along the lines of what Matt said, is that the criteria are reflections of our priorities. And, you know, by making the building a requirement, I wonder if that's a stronger way of saying to the applicants or people who are submitting the proposals, as well as to the community, that we are respecting the vote of prior town meeting and we're evolving that thought to making it a requirement in due time of an indoor facility. And just by using it as the ranking criteria, I feel like it maybe gives too much flexibility that will approve a proposal that doesn't include. I mean, I suppose we don't have to approve any proposal
Right.
at all. So
Right.
maybe I'm talking in circles to myself, but yeah. Okay. Well,
Because I think the risk is if you make it too stringent, then
Yeah.
nobody's going to submit a proposal.
right. Okay.
And that's fine. You could then reissue it with a different approach. But
Mhm.
what I'm suggesting is maybe there's a way to do this that gives you that maximum flexibility. You can evaluate a proposal overall based upon the quality of that proposal. And you could certainly require, you know, as long as it's raised in the RFP, you could say, okay, this proposal is great. It scores very well on all the criteria except this one. We will award to you on the condition that you agree that the building be built within 5 years.
Okay.
That gives you the maximum flexibility.
So long as that's clear when it's presented to town meeting, to me, you know, if it's too nuanced, then it can be hard to translate. So, okay, thank you, John.
Matt?
Yeah, can we reject any proposal in our sole discretion?
You can, the RFP will reserve the right to reject any and all proposals or to cancel the procurement at any time. I assume that's in there, Vicky, right? That
Yes, it is.
language?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to make sure because sometimes, you know, everyone hires lawyers to fill these things in. Everyone should get really high scores on it. And, you know, and then, you know, then we're stuck with the highest person saying, well, geez, I got the highest one. We want to make sure it's in our sole discretion. And I think some of the things that I've heard would be advantageous is not to have as much outside shooting, especially at the peak seasons. You know, I think certain things that a business would want or a club might want to generate business would not be advantageous because of, you know, what we're doing, you know, how people are going to handle, you know, lead is going to, some of those things, those are major issues. So I think, you know, how it's crafted, I have a hard time, you know, I think we should go forward. I think John's suggestions are good, but I want to make sure that we get a chance to look at their criteria before it go a little more closely. I know I didn't on this, but I would like to see that criteria before it goes out. I'm okay with it going out. I think this is something we need to do, but between now and then, I think we should all sit somewhere quietly and think about what are the priorities for that property. And is this, you know, this is our chance to say, is that the right use for this property? I look at town meetings slightly differently. We've been elected to be leaders. And sometimes the goal of, well, we'll go to town meeting and see what happens. And I'm not saying that any of you are saying that, but you know, sometimes I've dealt with boards that have done that. And I think that sometimes is a bit of it's sort of giving up your responsibility. You know, we're in these seats where we have to take the bullets. We have to take the good with the bad. We're in this to make these kind of hard decisions even before town meeting, you know, so I hope that we all sort of, you know, think about it.
Matt, I think you make a good point there, Matt. I agree. Sometimes we got to step up and make tough decisions. There's lots of leadership moments in these seats. I do think that it needs to go back to town meeting, and not for us to make a decision, because it was made in 2004, 2005, pretty unanimous, pretty strong. And times have changed, and I kind of want to see how, we're not hearing proponents of having shooting ranges here tonight. So I'll be interested to see how it happens at town meeting. Melissa?
So is the next step, do we need a motion to approve this RFP to move forward, and then that the criteria will be reviewed as a subsequent meeting? What's that process? How do we move this forward tonight?
John?
So I would suggest a motion to approve the draft RFP, subject to the preparation of a set of evaluation criteria, which will be brought back to the board for final approval before the RFP is issued.
I would make that motion.
Second.
Any discussion? No? Okay, we ready for a vote?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jason, one question. What would be the time frame in which we would expect to see the criteria and so on and so forth? Is that next month, 3 months? I'm just curious.
No, I would say we can do this relatively quickly.
Okay.
The only concern I would have is if there are other aspects of this RFP or evaluation criteria that the board would like to see. Obviously, we've been focused on the when an indoor facility would be constructed. But if there are other things the board wants to see in this RFP, now would be the time to get us those kinds of comments. And then we can put them on paper and bring them back to you in sort of in a final format so that the RFP would be ready for issuance.
So we could vote on this motion now and have a subsequent conversation on the criteria after that? Or should we have that conversation?
I think that you could vote on this motion now. And if you have other criteria that you want to see, the board members could send those to Libby. Okay, don't share them with each other, send them to Libby. We'll put them in the proper format, and then it would come back to the board for an open discussion and vote.
Great, thank you, John.
Any other comments? Okay, by roll call vote, Don Holgate,
Aye.
Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. That passes, and that'll be coming back in a week or two. We'll work with Libby on when that will be for in our agenda meetings.
Just a quick follow-up comment, Jason, if I could.
Yep.
I think Matt's point about having some time restrictions on the outdoor shooting once the indoor facility is built is going to be an important evaluation criteria.
Don, Matt?
I would echo that. That was going to be one of the things that I sent. And I mean, I think that it's actually doing things along the lines of skeet shooting and so forth, or clay shooting, whichever you call it, should probably be fewer and farther between when that's allowed, and maybe more into the shoulder season type of time frame. Certainly not, just certainly limitations. For noise factor, I think that we've got the noise factors, and we've got whatever mitigation can be proposed for environmental concerns. I did just want to make one point too, though. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's really not 27 acres because so much of it cannot be cleared. Is it 9 that's allowed to be cleared?
Right.
So it's a very big difference from 27.
Right. Right.
It has to be left as natural habitat.
Right.
Matt?
Well, let me, two things. It has to be left that that is specific to what was encouraged, from what I understand it, that's specific to what was applied for there. If something else was applied for, it might not be the same. You know, so natural heritage, you know, does that. It isn't the same from what I understand. And I think my other point, oh, no, I lost it. It'll come back to me. It'll come back.
Any other comments as we wrap up this agenda item? Okay. Thank you, everyone from the public. And thank you from the board and staff. It was a good discussion. We're gonna move on to select board reports and comments. We moved the discussion regarding the Town Government Study Committee report to next week because we anticipated this would be a longer discussion. So we're moving on to committee reports. Anybody? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Don Holgate,
Aye.
Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Parentella,
Aye.
Jason Bridges, aye. The motion passes. Thank you. My apologies to Kathy Ross, who had her hand up. I'm sorry I couldn't get to you tonight. Have a good night. Thank you.